Chapter 91. The two left the palace and went to the secret prison. A section of the road leading to the prison was paved with cement. When the carriage traveled on it, it was much smoother than other places. Shun Yu lifted the curtain and looked outside. When Da Huan is paved with such roads, it will be much more convenient to go back and forth. When there is a chance in the future, I will take you around Da Huan. Okay, Your Majesty, you can't go back on your words. The secret prison was brightly lit and was surrounded by layers of imperial guards. Shun Yu followed Shang Junlin out of the carriage and sighed. This is probably the most lively time in the secret prison. Wasn't it? In addition to the imperial guards, there were so many people who broke out of the prison. Shun Yu seriously doubted that the secret prison could hold all these people. On the other side, knowing that the secret order and the people were taken away by young Master He was furious. Are you all idiots? You let him take them away. Didn't I say that except for me, no one else can touch these things? Master, you really can't blame us. The servant wanted to cry but had no tears. Young Master He took your letter and said that you ordered him to come. You also told us before that you would do something tonight and asked us to be alert. We thought it was really you who sent young Master He. It could only be said that young Master He was too good at picking the time. After all, he was his eldest son. Master He wouldn't deliberately hide things from him. Except for some things that he really couldn't let him know, he would more or less reveal a bit of other things to young Master He. This time, it was the same. Family head He didn't have much vigilance against eldest young Master He, so he was easily tricked. Where is the letter? Show me. The servant took out a letter with trembling hands. Family head He took the letter and read it. He was so angry that he wanted to laugh. The handwriting and tone of the letter were almost the same as what he wrote. No wonder the servants didn't suspect anything. Besides, eldest young Master He made use of the time difference to take the girl away without anyone being suspicious. Master, what should we do now? That unfilial son most likely knows where his younger brother is and brought people to save him. See if you can bring him back. If you can, then there's still a chance of survival. If not, the servant didn't dare to delay and immediately left. However, before he could get far, he saw a group of Imperial Army soldiers surrounding him. In front of the well-trained Imperial Army, the He family had no power to resist. Patriarch He gritted his teeth and retreated to the secret passage with a few of his trusted subordinates. He had raised such a good son for nothing. In the end, Patriarch He and his eldest son, whom he missed dearly, met in the dark prison. By the time Shun Yu and Shang Junlin arrived, all of them had been caught. Shun Yu and Shang Junlin walked into the dark prison. The dark prison was filled with torches, so it was as bright as day. Shun Yu looked at the dark prison under such light for the first time. Patriarch He and eldest young Master He were locked up next to youngest young Master He. Prince Yu was locked up in another place. The rest of the prison breakers were either executed on the spot or locked up together. Prince Yu had heard the movements in the dark prison. He thought that these people were here to save him. However, he didn't expect that these people didn't stop at the place where he was locked up. They went directly to another place and were caught by the Imperial Army soldiers who had been lying in ambush for a long time. Prince Yu was stupefied from the beginning to the end. He had been in contact with the outside world these days. Those people also said that they would save him today. He waited and waited with full expectation. Finally, those people came. However, those people didn't even look at him. There were special officials in charge of the interrogation. Shang Junlin brought Shun Yu here just to see the situation. The leader of the Imperial Army followed beside the two of them and explained what happened that night. According to Your Majesty's order, I sent people to observe the eldest son of the He family in secret while guarding all the entrances of the secret prison. As expected, a group of unknown people met with the eldest son of the He family and headed straight for the secret prison. The rest of the matter was clear at a glance. Eldest young Master He, who was eager to save his younger brother, didn't know that he had fallen into the hunter's trap from the beginning. He brought people in and was caught red-handed. He directly accompanied youngest young Master He. After sending away the leader of the Imperial Army, Shang Junlin took Shun Yu to the place where Prince Yu was locked up. You have expected this, right? You allowed me to send messages to the outside world. You have been waiting for this moment for a long time, haven't you? Prince Yu calmed down and thought of many details. When he was first locked up in the dark prison, he couldn't get in touch with the outside world. Why did he suddenly get in touch with the outside world one day? In addition, there were many things that were wrong. At that time, he was in a hurry to get out. Even if he noticed it, he didn't take it seriously. Now that he thought about it, there were too many flaws. Prince Yu is smart this time. Unfortunately, even if they want to save you, they don't dare to show up in person. They only dare to send some people from afar and hand you over to the unreliable He family. Shang Junlin sneered. Prince Yu was full of hatred. But now he was completely defeated. He could only watch as Shang Junlin stood in front of him with the posture of a winner. Shang Junlin was a high and mighty emperor who looked down on everything. But he was a prisoner who was crushed into the mud. His future was unknown. Shun Yu was also looking at Prince Yu. The difference between the current Prince Yu and the man in his previous life was too big. It was so big that he began to doubt whether they were really the same person. It turned out that without the so-called protagonist's halo and the praise that was deliberately applied to him, he was just such an ordinary person. Shang Junlin handed over the prison break to official Fang, who had hurried over, and returned to the palace with Shen Yu. Along the way, Shen Yu didn't speak. When they arrived at Yuzhang Palace, Shang Junlin directly carried him out of the carriage. Yu is still thinking about Prince Yu's matter. Shen Yu shook his head and nodded. He was thinking more about his previous life. He thought that what he saw with his own eyes in his previous life and the book he read after his death was the whole truth. At this moment, he suddenly realized that both of them were confusing. Sure enough, he couldn't rely too much on the so-called world's plot. Shang Junlin didn't put him down. He directly carried him and walked inside. Everywhere he passed, the palace servants lowered their heads. Shen Yu fluttered, "Your Majesty, quickly put me down." "I won't." Shang Junlin flatly refused. "So many people are watching, isn't it right and proper for me to carry my noble husband? Not only can I carry you, I can also kiss you, I can." Enough, Shen Yu didn't want him to continue, so he interrupted, "If your Majesty wants to carry me, then carry me. As long as your Majesty doesn't dislike me for being heavy." "How can I dislike a Yu for being heavy? A Yu should be fatter. It's more comfortable to carry." Shang Junlin weighed the young man in his arms. To him, Shen Yu's weight was really nothing. From a minor illness to a major one, Shen Yu's weight was still much lighter than a normal person's, even though he had recovered a little during this time. The He family was taken down in one fell swoop. Following the clues of the He family, they finally found traces of the mysterious power behind them. Although they couldn't find the real mastermind, it was much better than before. Shang Junlin arranged for the officials who were transferred back from other places one by one. The new officials who entered the imperial examination also gradually entered the imperial court. Everything seemed to be thriving. The Grand Commandant who planned the fraud in the imperial examination was removed from his position, and the position of Grand Commandant was vacant. The aristocratic families and the officials from poor families fought to the death in the imperial court for this position. Especially the aristocratic families, they had already lost too much. If the person who took the position of Grand Commandant wasn't from their faction, it would be a huge blow to them. As Shang Junlin promoted a group of new officials, the aristocratic family's monopoly of the imperial court was finally broken. Because of the aristocratic family's interference, the position of Grand Commandant was never decided. These disputes temporarily didn't affect the peace of Hanlin Academy. "The two of you came together again." Jiang Huiqing smiled and greeted the person who spoke, replying, "I rode on Brother Cheng Yu's carriage. You know, I'm a little embarrassed recently." The reason was that Jiang Huiqing took a fancy to a set of unique copies. He really wanted it and was worried that it would be bought by someone else if he was late, so he could only reluctantly buy it. I know. When you finish copying, don't forget to lend it to us." "I won't forget." Jiang Huiqing was on duty with He Chengyu. At first, Jiang Huiqing had some misgivings and didn't want to get too close to him. Later, when he saw that his colleagues were easy to get along with, he acted much more casually. He still lived with He Changyu, and the two of them went in and out together. The people in Hanlin Academy knew that they had a good relationship and often joked about it. Jiang Huiqing went from being embarrassed at the beginning to being able to face it calmly, and only 10 days had passed. That's right, I seem to have found one of the files you asked me to find last time. Do you want to take a look? Thank you. Jiang Huiqing's eyes lit up. It's been a few decades. Why are you looking for these? The person was curious. I admire the great scholars of the past and want to know more about them, Jiang Huiqing explained with a smile. That's right. You are indeed interested in these. I will help you pay more attention to other things. He didn't suspect anything. After all, Jiang Huiqing's hobby had been deeply rooted in the people of Hanlin Academy. It was normal for a person who could spend all his money to buy a unique book to be interested in the deeds of the great scholars of the past. Fortunately, he had a good relationship with Scholar He, so he could be helped from time to time. Shun Yu occasionally received letters from Jiang Huiqing, and they were all about daily interesting things. Shun Yu also wrote a few letters in reply. For some reason, Shun Yu found that Shang Junlin didn't seem to like to talk about Prince Yu in front of him recently. Even if he asked, the topic would be changed after 2 or 3 sentences. Why does Your Majesty suddenly not want to talk to me about Prince Yu? After the topic was changed again, Shun Yu asked. He wanted to know if Shang Junlin simply didn't want him to know about Prince Yu, or did he not want him to know about other things as well? Shang Junlin stroked Shun Yu's neck and said in a hoarse voice, I brought you to the dark prison that day for selfish reasons. Huh? Shun Yu was stunned. I know that when you were outside the palace, Prince Yu approached you. I wanted you to see Prince Yu. Your Majesty, Shun Yu interrupted Shang Junlin. Does Your Majesty care about these things? Shang Junlin looked at him with deep eyes. The more you loved someone, the more you couldn't tolerate that person having any shadow of someone else. You could say that he was overbearing or paranoid, but he didn't want anyone else to occupy Shun Yu's eyes and mind. He brought Shun Yu to see Prince Yu because he wanted him to deeply understand that Prince Yu was not worthy of his love. After a long while, Shang Junlin held Shun Yu's hand. I thought that I could ignore Yu's matters outside the palace, but I was wrong. I can't ignore it. Everything that happened to Yu, I can't ignore it. Was what Yu said to Prince Yu true? Did Yu really just treat Prince Yu as my substitute? Chapter 92. Shun Yu was silent for a moment. Your Majesty, why are you so clear about what I said before I entered the palace? He asked while knowing the answer. With the hidden dragon guards, everything in the capital could not be hidden from Shang Junlin. Since he was chosen to enter the palace, it was normal for him to be investigated. I know that Prince Yu once approached you with his identity hidden. Later on, you two had a conflict. Shang Junlin pinched Shun Yu's chin and turned his head to face him. Yu, answer my question. Shang Junlin's eyes were dark as he stared at Shun Yu without blinking. A biting cold aura swept over. Shun Yu narrowed his eyes uncomfortably. Your Majesty, don't you know what I think? Why do you care about Prince Yu? What is he? How can he be compared to Your Majesty? As for the matter between me and Prince Yu, Your Majesty must know my character very well. How can I be sincere to someone who approached me with an impure purpose from the beginning? Shun Yu knew that since Shang Junlin asked, he would not be able to mediate this matter. No matter what kind of feelings he had for Shang Junlin, he did not want Prince Yu to be a thorn between them. He and Prince Yu had broken off completely in his previous life. In this life, there would be no involvement. I know that Prince Yu is not a good person. Shang Junlin gently stroked Shun Yu's chin. Yu, I am not suspecting you. I know. Shun Yu covered Shang Junlin's mouth. Your Majesty, you don't need to say this. I should have explained to you about Prince Yu. I said those words just to annoy him. Now it seems that maybe it was a prophecy. The only difference is that I have no interest in finding a substitute. If I love someone, I will do whatever it takes to get them. Even if I can't get them, I will not do something as immoral as finding a substitute. What's more, how can Prince Yu be worthy? In Shun Yu's eyes, Shun Yu was arrogant and unscrupulous. Shang Junlin knew that what Shen Yu said was exactly what he thought. Shang Junlin loosened his grip on Shen Yu's chin and suddenly pulled her into his arms. "Zhen understands, are you?" Shen Yu patted Shang Junlin's back to comfort him. "Your Majesty, you don't have to think too much. There is no fate between King Yu and me, and there will be no follow-up." Shang Junlin rested his head on Shen Yu's shoulder. "Who is a Yu's fate? Of course it's your Majesty. With your Majesty here, no one else would have a chance. Does your Majesty lack confidence in yourself?" After receiving Shen Yu's accurate answer, the haze in Shang Junlin's heart that had been covering him for many days was blown away by the wind. He tightened his arms and wished he could rub Shen Yu into his body. Seeing that Shang Junlin was comforted, Shen Yu was relieved. He didn't want King Yu to become a barrier between them. As summer came, the weather gradually became hotter. The courtiers received the news that they would go to the summer palace this year and began to prepare. While preparing, they couldn't help but be curious. Why does His Majesty suddenly want to go to the summer palace this year? A few years ago, some courtiers proposed it, but they were all rejected by him. His Majesty has never enjoyed himself. This time, it may be because of you. No matter what the reason is, the successive emperors of Dahuan have all gone to the summer palace every year, except for our current His Majesty. To be honest, the summer in the capital is too hot. It's good to go there to avoid the summer heat. The one who spoke was the official who had written several times to ask His Majesty to go to the summer palace to avoid the summer heat. He thought that he would have to spend the summer in the capital until he resigned. He didn't expect the surprise to come so suddenly. The weather was getting hotter and hotter. Shen Yu's clothes were getting thinner and thinner. His body temperature was still as cold as before. It was very comfortable to hold him in his arms. Shang Junlin held him in his arms whenever he had time. This made Shen Yu suffer. Men were hot-tempered. In the winter, it was fine. He was a human-shaped big heater. Shen Yu nestled in his arms and felt a steady stream of heat. It was very comfortable. It was different in the summer. Every time he was hugged by Shang Junlin for a while, he would sweat all over. There was a small lake in Yuzhang Palace. A pavilion was built on the lake. Since the weather became hot, Shen Yu's favorite place became this pavilion. According to Shen Yu's preferences, the pavilion was decorated in a new way. There was light-colored gauze hanging around, and there was ice in the corner. A cool breeze blew over the water, bringing a burst of coolness. Shang Junlin finished his work and returned to Yuzhang Palace. He looked around the room but couldn't find Shen Yu. He walked straight to the pavilion. There had always been no shortage of ice in the palace. However, Imperial physician Ji Yu said that Shen Yu's body wasn't good, so he couldn't be too cold. There wasn't much ice in the room. Although Shen Yu was afraid of the cold in the winter, he was the one who was the most cold in the summer. After the pavilion was cleaned up, Shen Yu came here most often. Shang Junlin lifted the gauze and saw Shen Yu half leaning on the couch, reading a book. Young eunuch Meng was holding a fan and gently fanning Shen Yu behind him. The palace servant knelt down to greet him. Shen Yu put down the book in his hand and sat up. "Your Majesty, are you done with your work?" "Yes." Shang Junlin walked to Shen Yu's side and sat down next to him. When he was setting up the pavilion, due to space restrictions, the soft couch inside was much smaller than the one in Jade Gate Palace. Shang Junlin could be considered to have fulfilled a small wish of his. As soon as Shang Junlin leaned over, he brought a burst of hot air. Shen Yu dodged to the side and was caught by the man. "Where are you hiding, are you? It's so hot." Shen Yu refused to stick close to Shang Junlin. "There is ice in the pavilion. Let me hug you for a while." Shang Junlin firmly held Shen Yu's waist with one hand and did not let him go. "Your Majesty, don't you feel hot?" Shen Yu was helpless. Shang Junlin rubbed his cheek. "A Yu's body is very cold. But Your Majesty's body is very hot." Shen Yu leaned his body away, wanting to stay away from the man. "A Yu likes to snuggle into my arms during winter. Why do you dislike me now?" Shang Junlin pressed Shen Yu's back and pulled him into his arms. Shen Yu gave up struggling and half lay in the man's arms. "Your Majesty also knows that it's winter. There was ice in the pavilion, so it was not that hot." Shun Yu quietly lay there for a while, and the temperature of his body gradually dropped. He knew that the man would not let him go, so he simply found a comfortable position and continued to read the book on the side. "How is the use of ice in your room recently?" Shang Junlin asked Mu Shi, who was serving beside him. Mu Shi told him the amount, which was strictly according to Shang Junlin's instructions. Shang Junlin nodded with satisfaction. Shun Yu was speechless. He knocked his head against the man's chest. "Your Majesty has already given an order to the people in my palace. Are you still worried that I will use more ice? Did you forget that you almost caught a cold last time because you were greedy for the cold?" Shang Junlin pinched his earlobe. Shun Yu lowered his head guiltily. The weather suddenly became hot a few days ago, and he could not stand it, so he asked the palace people to put more ice in the bedroom. If Shang Junlin had not found out and removed some ice in time, he would have most likely fallen ill because of the cold. After that, Shang Junlin strictly controlled the amount of ice in his palace. Shun Yu read the book for a while and suddenly thought of something. "Your Majesty, is it only the influential families in the capital that can use ice? Some big merchants can also use it." "Why?" "Most of the ice used in Dahuan in the summer was stored ice. Not to mention the huge amount of work, there were not many that could be preserved. Some families with the ability would store their own ice. Those who did not have this ability would choose to buy it. However, because of the quantity, the price was often higher, and ordinary people rarely bought it. I just suddenly thought of a way to make ice, and it's very simple. If we can make ice, the people in Dahuan can also use it." Shun Yu said the method he learned from the book. As one of the golden fingers of the main character in the book, Shen Qingran, it brought him some benefits. "What method?" Shang Junlin was interested. "When saltpeter is dissolved in water, it can be made into ice." Shun Yu ordered people to bring saltpeter and water. After experimenting, he really got ice. Looking at the freshly made ice that was emitting cold air, Shun Yu's eyes flashed with a touch of complexity. In his previous life, when the King of Yu found out about this method, the first thing he did was to kill everyone who knew about it. Then he arranged for a group of mute slaves to make ice for him and sell it at a high price. In his previous life, Shun Yu did not know that the method to make ice was so simple. When he knew that the King of Yu used mute slaves to make ice, he thought that there was some secret behind it. This method is really convenient. Shang Junlin felt that the newly made ice was not much different from storing ice. Compared to storing ice in winter, it was much easier to make saltpeter. With this method, ordinary people can also use ice in summer. Mu Shi was so shocked by this scene that she could not close her mouth. After giving the things to Shang Junlin, Shun Yu did not ask any more questions. What Shang Junlin wanted to do with it was his business, as long as he did not end up as a money-making tool like the King of Yu. He knew that Shang Junlin would not do that, otherwise, he would not have taken out these things. Shun Yu wiped his hands and lay back on the couch. With the addition of a basin of ice in the pavilion, it was even cooler. The palace servants kept looking at the newly made ice. Their eyes were filled with curiosity. Shang Junlin also stood beside the ice and looked at it for a while before sitting back on the couch. Once the news of the new method to make ice was announced, it caused an uproar in the imperial court. Everyone knew how hot the summer in the capital was. Those who had the ability to store ice would definitely store more in winter. Those who did not have this ability could only buy ice in summer at a high price. If they could make ice in summer, it would bring more convenience. I have not announced the method to the public for the time being. Shang Junlin changed out of his court attire and walked towards Shun Yu. I will let the imperial court control it for a period of time. When the conditions are right in the future, I will decide whether to announce it or not. The imperial court would set the price. This could prevent the ice from falling into the hands of a small number of aristocratic families and becoming their money-making tool. It could also prevent some unscrupulous merchants from selling the ice at a high price to other places in Dahuan. Your Majesty can decide. Shun Yu did not have any objections. After the date of the trip to the Summer Palace was confirmed, everyone in Yuzhong Palace became busy. A large group of people headed to the Summer Palace. Shun Yu was directly arranged to stay in Shang Junlin's residence. The summer palace was built halfway up the mountain. As soon as they came up, they could feel a burst of coolness. Shun Yu squinted his eyes in satisfaction. Your Majesty did not arrange a place for me to stay? Shun Yu looked around at the decorations. There were many things that could only be used by the emperor. A Yu naturally has to live with me. Shang Junlin did not give him a chance to refuse. He directly picked him up and walked inside. The palace servants lowered their heads and focused on their own matters. Shun Yu was already used to Shang Junlin carrying him here and there. He skillfully wrapped his arms around the man's neck and gently blew into his ear. I have been living with your Majesty. The ministers won't say anything, right? Shang Junlin's footsteps paused. His eyes darkened. He quickly put him on the bed and ran his fingers across his cheek. A Yu has to behave well. Chapter 93. Shun Yu was a noble, so naturally, he should have his own residence in the palace. The quality of his residence would show how favored he was. At the beginning of the arrangement, the people in the palace had allocated a good courtyard for Shun Yu, but Shang Junlin rejected it and arranged for Shun Yu to live in his residence. When they were in the palace, it was Shang Junlin's biggest regret that he couldn't move Shun Yu to his own palace. Now that he had the chance, he wouldn't let Shun Yu live in another courtyard. Shun Yu said those words to tease Shang Junlin. He didn't care what those officials thought of him. If he really cared about these things, he wouldn't have chosen to enter the palace in the first place. Shun Yu was gently placed on the bed by the man. Then, he hooked his arm around Shang Junlin's neck and didn't let him get up. Your Majesty, what do you want me to do? Shang Junlin rubbed Shun Yu's soft lips with his fingertips. With a little force, his fingers sank into her lips. What does a Yu think? Isn't spring already over? Shun Yu looked at Shang Junlin with clear eyes. Shang Junlin reacted for a while before he realized what Shun Yu was hinting at. He leaned over and covered the young man with his body. With a Yu by my side, why do I need to wait until spring? Shun Yu's tongue touched the man's fingertips. It was like a casual sweep, which easily aroused the desire in the man's heart. But your Majesty is going to see the ministers soon. Shun Yu blinked innocently, as if she wasn't the one who had deliberately aroused the man's desire. Shang Junlin suddenly withdrew his hand, pressed the young man to himself, and kissed him fiercely. The man's kiss could never be called gentle. It was like a storm, with a strong sense of aggression. Every movement showed the intention of eating the young man. Shun Yu was forced to raise her head and bear all the wind and rain that swept over her. Are you sure that I can't do anything now? Shang Junlin bit Shun Yu's lips and slowly retreated. Shun Yu's face was dyed with a layer of light pink. Her lips seemed to be painted with rouge. Her hair was spread out under her body, slightly messy. Your Majesty obviously started it first. The young man's eyes were watery and red. He lay down softly. Shang Junlin almost exhausted his lifetime of restraint, but he didn't do anything. I'll let you go this time. After he finished speaking, Shang Junlin got up. Shun Yu tilted his head and laughed softly. He didn't know when it started, but he liked to see Shang Junlin's helpless expression. Your Majesty, Shun Yu's eyes glanced at a certain place. No. After settling down here, he still needed to meet with the courtiers. This little time was not enough. Shun Yu laughed enough and slowly sat up. In fact, he was also a little moved, but it was not as obvious as Shang Junlin. He was fine after a while. I also asked Imperial Physician Ji Yu to come over. If you are not used to it, let him take a look at you. Shang Junlin tidied Shun Yu's hair. Because he had helped Shun Yu recuperate, Imperial Physician Ji Yu had become the person Shang Junlin valued the most in the Imperial Hospital. This time, Shang Junlin had also brought him along. Officials were allowed to bring their family members to the summer palace. Imperial Physician Ji Yu was worried about leaving Ji Yu Huai alone in the capital, so he brought him along. The other courtiers also brought their wives and favored children. The summer palace, which had been cold for many years, suddenly became lively. After Shun Yu tidied up, he brought Mu Shi out of the courtyard. This palace was built with the power of several generations of the great Huan dynasty's monarchs. As the monarch, the place where Shang Junlin lived was the best one. Young master, This place is so beautiful. The surrounding scenery was unique. She couldn't take it all in. Yes, in terms of enjoyment, who can compare to the imperial family? This was the first time Shen Yu came to this summer palace. When the late emperor was still on the throne, Duke Shunbei doted on the concubine's son. Even if he could bring his family members here, he would never think of Shen Yu, the legitimate son. On the contrary, Shen Qingran and Madame Yu came here because of Duke Shunbei. After Shen Qingran went back, he showed off in front of little Shen Yu. Shen Yu thought at that time that he must come here with his own strength in the future to see what it was like. Now, not only did he come here, but he also lived in the most honorable place. However, he no longer had the same mood as when he was a child. Who did Duke Shunbei bring here? Shen Yu asked. It's concubine Ju, who used to be at odds with concubine Yu. She had already found out. Shen Qingran didn't come? No, he's still locked up by Duke Shunbei. Duke Shunbei had been fighting with the forces of the King of Yu for a while. The trouble caused by Shen Qingran was also solved after a lot of effort. Now, whenever he heard Shen Qingran's name, he would feel annoyed. How could he bring him out? Shang Junlin brought nearly half of the officials here. Although he said it was to avoid the summer heat, in fact, it was just a change of location to deal with government affairs. There were still a lot of memorials to approve every day. Because he was not in the capital, the workload was heavier than before. Shen Yu saw that Shang Junlin was so busy every day that his feet didn't touch the ground. He sincerely felt that being the emperor was not a good job. Even if he was in the summer palace, Shang Junlin didn't relax his control of all kinds of things in the capital. Every day, the movements in the capital would be transmitted to the summer palace through a special channel. The summer palace was smaller than the capital. Shen Yu bumped into Duke Shunbei several times. He didn't know if Duke Shunbei did it deliberately, but every time Duke Shunbei saw him, he didn't do anything, so Shen Yu didn't care. Concubine Ju, who followed Duke Shunbei, was warm and respectful to Shen Yu, as if she didn't hit him when he was down in the past. Shen Yu was too lazy to pay attention to them. Gradually, he didn't go out anymore. Young master, recently, there are a lot of good-looking young masters and young ladies around His Majesty. Do they really think that His Majesty is someone that everyone can covet? She walked in angrily. Shen Yu put Shang Junlin's newly picked flowers in a vase. His Majesty will take care of it himself. He didn't know where Shang Junlin had learned recently, but he would bring some fresh flowers back every day. Some of them could survive, so Shen Yu asked the palace servants to find a vase and raise them well. Those that couldn't be dried were put in a storybook that he had already finished reading. Young master, aren't you worried at all? When she heard the news, she was anxious to death. Now, she had completely recognized Shang Junlin's existence. She didn't want a third person to take away Shang Junlin's favor. Of course, she knew that as the emperor, it was impossible to have only one person in the harem forever. But she just couldn't accept that Shang Junlin, who said that he wouldn't accept any new people, had anyone besides Shen Yu. She often walked outside these days and heard a lot of news. His Majesty had clearly said that, so why were these people still dreaming of becoming a member of the harem? Shen Yu took a handkerchief and wiped his hands. He said neither too fast nor too slow, "What am I worried about? What they think in their hearts is their own business. Can I care what they think? If they really enter the palace, what will you do? I brought you out to let you relax. Why are you more worried than in the palace? Don't worry, your young master won't let these things happen." Since Shang Junlin had promised him, he wouldn't have the chance to regret it. As for those who coveted Shang Junlin, he didn't mind doing what he said. Once they entered the palace, they couldn't blame him for not being able to get out. Shen Yu thought that these words would only spread in a small circle. He didn't expect that when he went out for a walk with Shang Junlin, he would encounter them. "Miss is so beautiful. You're not inferior to Shen Gui Jun. As long as His Majesty sees you, he will definitely like you. But, miss, don't say but. Eldest young master said that this is our best chance. If we succeed, miss will be a concubine in the future. You won't have to worry about being casually married off. Enyang's life in the Fu will also be much better." "You're right," the woman composed herself, Are you sure His Majesty will pass by here? Miss, don't worry. This servant has already asked around. You only need to wait here quietly for a while. His Majesty will come over. At that time, whether or not it succeeds depends on Miss at the corner. Shin Yu elbowed Shang Junlin. His Majesty is really popular. If I didn't follow him out today, would he have a beautiful encounter with the woman in front of him? Is you jealous? Shang Junlin grabbed Shin Yu's arm and directly pulled him into his arms. He leaned close to his ear and whispered, from the beginning to the end, Jin only wants you. Jin thought you already knew. The conversation at the corner was still going on, but Shin Yu couldn't hear it. The wet touch spread from the back of his ear, little by little, until it reached his lips and stopped. Shang Junlin's lips were close to Shin Yu's skin. His hot breath sprayed on Shin Yu's face. I thought they had already given up. Shin Yu frowned. Shang Junlin had repeatedly expressed his attitude, but he didn't expect these people to still be unwilling. Shang Junlin's fingertips gently brushed the wrinkles between Shin Yu's eyebrows. How can they give up so easily? With the imperial power hanging in front of them, no matter how Jin expresses his attitude, they will still have this kind of heart. Do you think they are interested in Jin? No, they are interested in the power and interests behind Jin. Does His Majesty want to go out and see her? How could Shin Yu not know this? Since ancient times, how many women who entered the harem were completely willing? Jin Yu is jealous. Why would Jin still want to see her? Shang Junlin suddenly picked up Shin Yu, turned around and left. The leaves rustled down. Not far away, two women turned their heads and only saw the swaying branches. Did someone come by just now? I don't think so. This servant didn't notice anyone. Shin Yu was carried all the way back to the bedroom. Eunuch Meng came forward and was directly reprimanded. Eunuch Meng didn't dare to stay and led all the palace servants out of the room. Shin Yu was thrown onto the bed and pressed down by Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin was half a head taller than Shin Yu and could completely wrap him under his body. Shin Yu was uncomfortable being pressed down by Shang Junlin, so he pushed Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin didn't move away. Instead, he moved closer and stared at the young man under him with his long and narrow eyes. Shin Yu narrowed his eyes and skillfully turned over to press down on Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin didn't expect Shin Yu's actions and his eyes flashed with a trace of astonishment. Shin Yu sat on Shang Junlin's waist with one hand on his chest and the other holding his chin. His Majesty attracts bees and butterflies. I want to punish His Majesty. Shang Junlin's tense body relaxed and his eyes flashed with interest. How does you want to punish Jin? Just punish His Majesty by not being able to move. Shin Yu finished speaking and bent down. Her black hair poured down and spread over Shang Junlin's entire chest. Shang Junlin's Adam's apple bobbed violently. This was the sweetest and most torturous thing. Let Jin touch you. Shang Junlin couldn't hold back anymore. He turned over and held Shin Yu down, then lowered his head and kissed him. The kiss went all the way down, accompanied by a light nibbling, and finally stopped at a certain spot. Shin Yu moved uneasily and suddenly felt that he was wrapped in warmth. Don't. Chapter 94. Shin Yu never expected that Shang Junlin would do such a thing for him. Shin Yu could not hold on to the quilt under his body. He felt like he was in the middle of a storm. He was thrown up high and could not fall down. The flowers by the window were blooming beautifully. The branches reached into the room and shyly closed the petals. After a long time, Shang Junlin released him. His Adam's apple moved as he swallowed the food in his mouth. Shin Yu was confused. When he saw this scene, his eyes were filled with turbulent waves. He even forgot what he wanted to say. Shang Junlin supported his body and moved upward. He found Shin Yu's lips and leaned over. Shin Yu tilted his head to avoid it. Shang Junlin turned his face. A storm was brewing in his eyes. Why are you avoiding me? Your Majesty did not rinse your mouth. Why do you dislike your own things? Shang Junlin found it funny. Shin Yu did not answer. He also did not give him a kiss. Shang Junlin left a trail of kiss marks on Shin Yu's cheeks and neck. Shin Yu's heart was itching. He got up and casually rinsed his mouth with water. He leaned over again. Is this enough? As soon as he finished speaking, his kiss fell on Shen Yu's lips. I want you. Accompanied by the sound of sucking and water, the man's voice was low and dangerous. Shen Yu struggled. His body was so weak that he could not escape from the man's shackles. Shen Yu frowned in discomfort when the place that had never been touched by anyone was suddenly visited. The man's kiss left his lips and covered his eyes. Relax. Shen Yu could not relax. His body was stretched into a line. Shang Junlin tried several times, but Shen Yu could not adapt. A thin layer of sweat appeared on their foreheads. Shen Yu bit his lower lip to relieve the discomfort. Because of the pain, his face was pale. His lips were red and the corners of his eyes were red. His brows were tightly knitted. Kissing the side of his neck, Shang Junlin took a deep breath and resisted the urge to continue. Shang Junlin had been worried that Shen Yu might not accept him easily, but he did not expect that things would be so difficult at the last moment. After the finger left, Shen Yu felt a little better. He raised his hand and touched the sweat on the man's forehead. Your Majesty, please solve it yourself. How can you be so heartless? Shang Junlin closed the distance between him and Shen Yu. Shen Yu was firmly restrained by the man. She felt guilty and turned her face away from Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin pressed his thumb on his rosy lips and said in a low and hoarse voice, can you help me in another place? Shen Yu pursed his lips. Even dislikes his own things. I won't force you. Other than here, Shang Junlin touched Shen Yu's lips. His eyes were dark. There are other places where you can help me. I'm afraid that you will be tired today. After Shang Junlin finished speaking, he kissed the young man's lips again. This time, his actions were swift and ruthless. Shen Yu was once again thrown up high by the churning waves. His tightly clenched fingers were forcefully separated, and the gaps between his fingers were invaded as he interlocked his fingers with Shang Junlin's. The sky gradually darkened. During the ups and downs, Shen Yu was awakened by the man's actions several times. He was very tired. However, Shang Junlin was in high spirits and did it again and again. Unrestrained. Shen Yu did not remember when he fell asleep. When he woke up again, the sky was already bright outside. His body was very fresh. It seemed that he had been washed. His clothes were dry and the bedding had been changed. Shen Yu moved and instantly felt sore all over his body. At the end of last night, Shen Yu wanted to directly kick the man out of bed. However, every time he stretched out his leg, the man would grab it and play with it. After suffering a few losses, Shen Yu could only let him do as he pleased. Shen Yu did not know how others were like, but he knew that Shang Junlin's energy was definitely not something a normal person could have. Last night, he might have been stimulated and did it for longer than usual. It was more than just a little tired. Shen Yu rubbed his sore wrist and wanted to sit up. Shang Junlin came in with a bowl of hot porridge and saw Shen Yu getting up. The young man's face was flushed. His eyebrows and eyes were wrinkled. His lips were especially red and covered with a layer of water, like a ripe fruit that was tempting to be picked. As he moved, his thin clothes slid open, revealing a mottled area. Shang Junlin walked quickly to the bed, put the porridge aside, and helped Shen Yu get up. Are you hungry? Shang Junlin calculated the time and came back with the porridge. Shen Yu just opened his eyes. A little. Shen Yu had not rested for almost the entire night. He looked tired. Knowing that he loved cleanliness, Shang Junlin asked the palace servants to bring hot water. After washing up, Shen Yu put on a coat and moved to the soft bed. He was not very comfortable and was not in a good mood. Shang Junlin fed Shen Yu spoonful by spoonful of porridge. Seeing that he was still a little tired, he asked, "Do you want to sleep for a while more?" Shen Yu did not want to sleep anymore. Shang Junlin accompanied him for the whole day. In the evening, he was called away by the minister for a meeting. Shang Junlin dilly-dallied and refused to leave. Shen Yu pushed him, "Your Majesty, you should go do your business." Shang Junlin had no choice but to go. When he came back, Shen Yu had already fallen asleep on the soft bed. Under the candlelight, Shang Junlin stared at his face for a while. Then, he gently picked him up and put him on the bed. Perhaps he was too tired the night before. Shen Yu did not wake up even after being carried around. The next day, Shen Yu was still a little tired. Shang Junlin called Imperial Physician Ji Yu to examine him. After Imperial Physician Ji Yu finished checking his pulse, he glanced at Shang Junlin and lowered his head to think about the wording. Imperial Physician Ji Yu, if you have something to say, just say it. Shang Junlin held Shen Yu and massaged Shen Yu's finger bones with one hand. Imperial Physician Ji Yu made up his mind and tried to speak in a calm tone. Your Majesty has not fully recovered. Your Majesty needs to control your sexual activities. Shang Junlin paused. I understand. Imperial Physician Ji Yu prescribed the medicine and left. On the way back, he shook his head and thought, Your Majesty has worked hard. Shen Yu was in a daze for 3 days. On the 4th day, he finally recovered. Have you heard anyone talking about entering the harem these days? Shen Yu brewed a pot of tea for himself and asked Mu Shi. No. Her Majesty has warned those families who had thoughts about it. Now, at least they don't dare to show it on the surface. As for what they thought in their hearts, Mu Shi felt that her young master was right. How could she care about what these people thought in their hearts? Since the matter had been solved by Shang Junlin, Shen Yu did not ask any more questions. Her Majesty has asked someone to make a swing. Do you want to sit on it? Mu Shi saw that Shen Yu was in a good mood today and suggested. Shen Yu had been cooped up in his room for a few days. He also felt that it was time to go out for a walk. The swing in the courtyard was very different from the one in Yuzhang Palace. Shen Yu walked over and touched it. Then, he sat down. The swing was set up under an ancient tree. The ancient tree was lush with branches and leaves, blocking the sunlight overhead. Shen Yu took a miscellaneous book and slowly flipped through it. Who is trespassing? There was a noise outside. Shen Yu pulled his mind out of the book and asked, What's going on? I don't know. Mu Shi looked confused. I'll go and take a look. After Mu Shi finished speaking, she turned and walked towards the source of the noise. After a while, Mu Shi came back. Her face was a little ugly. It's a woman. She wants to see Her Majesty. The establishment of a new department in the Independent Ministry of Works had been put on the agenda. Shang Junlin had been busy with this matter recently. Now, he happened to be discussing it with the Prime Minister and others. Did she say the reason? Shen Yu put down the book. No. Mu Shi shook her head. She didn't summon anyone. The guards didn't let her in. She insisted. I sent someone to send her away. Even in the temporary imperial residence, it wasn't easy to see the emperor. Shen Yu and Shang Junlin's residence was heavily guarded. If there was no summon, the guards wouldn't let anyone in. Ordinary people wouldn't force their way in for no reason. It was a serious crime to disturb the emperor. Shen Yu got up from the swing. Take me to see her. Before he got close, Shen Yu heard a woman's gentle voice. This voice gave Shen Yu a familiar feeling. When he got closer, he saw that it was the person he met a few days ago. After he came back that day, Shen Yu went for wool and came home shorn. He almost got himself killed. Now that he saw her, he suddenly felt a dull pain somewhere. That day, except for not going in, he did everything he should and shouldn't. In the end, Shen Yu was so tired that he couldn't even lift a finger. What's going on? Shen Yu coughed softly and interrupted the confrontation. Guijun. The guard bowed. This woman said that His Majesty left something with her. She wants to return it to His Majesty in person. But she didn't summon anyone, so I can't let her in. How could His Majesty leave something with you? Shen Yu looked at the woman standing outside indifferently. The woman bit her lip. His Majesty went to Yin Yu Pavilion that day. This humble woman met His Majesty there. The thing was also left there. Give it to me. I will give it to His Majesty for you. Shen Yu didn't intend to let her in. This woman coveted the imperial harem. Her purpose for coming here today was probably not pure. No, I have to give it to His Majesty personally. The woman took a step back, her eyes red. Shen Yu narrowed his eyes. Is your purpose to return the thing or to see His Majesty? If it's the former, just give it to me. If it's the latter, I advise you not to waste your time. Her purpose was naturally the latter. That day, she waited in the woods until late at night, but she didn't see His Majesty. When she went back, she was puzzled. The next day, she heard that His Majesty was furious and forbade them to have any evil thoughts. She was silent for 2 days. In order to relieve her depression, she got lost. She didn't expect to pick up the jade pendant that His Majesty dropped. At that moment, she realized that her opportunity had come. She also heard that Shungui Jun was a very scheming person in the palace. Her brother warned her not to confront this person. She didn't achieve her purpose, so she didn't want to make enemies easily. But she didn't expect that Shungui Jun would be so direct. Being looked at by those clear eyes, it seemed that all the calculations in her heart couldn't be hidden. How can Gui Jun slander this humble woman like this? This humble woman just wants to return the jade pendant that His Majesty left in this humble woman's hands. There is no other intention. No matter what, she must never admit her thoughts. Jade pendant. His Majesty left the jade pendant with you? The young man's expression was unreadable. The woman felt a little uneasy in her heart, but she still nodded. I was wondering why His Majesty lost a jade pendant 2 days ago. It turns out that you picked it up. Shang Junlin didn't care if it was lost. It was only when Shunyu found that the jade pendant he wore was missing a piece that he realized that it was lost. Since it was lost, there is no need to take it back. But after all, it is His Majesty's personal item. It's not good to leave it in the hands of outsiders. Mushi, give me the jade pendant. Mushi walked to the woman's side. Regardless of her struggle, she took the jade pendant back and handed it to Shunyu. Shunyu didn't even look at it and directly threw it on the ground. In an instant, the jade pendant was smashed into pieces. It's something that has been touched by others. Just destroy it. Chapter 95. This was worn by His Majesty. Aren't you afraid that His Majesty will blame you for destroying it? The woman didn't expect that Shunyu would be so unreasonable. Her face changed greatly. If I fell, then so be it. His Majesty will only care about whether I fell to my heart's content. Shunyu turned around and said coldly, send this girl back. How could the woman be willing to accept that her plan had failed before it could be implemented? She looked at the jade pendant that was broken by Shunyu, and her eyes flashed with resentment. What was worse than the thing that she wanted was easily taken away by others? She had waited for a long time for this opportunity, but it was easily destroyed by others. Moreover, it was in such a way. How could she not see that Shunyu was warning her not to touch something that she shouldn't covet? But why? Shunyu was just luckier than her. He entered the palace 1 step ahead of her. Why did he put on such a high and mighty attitude? Gui Jun, does His Majesty know that you are so jealous? I just wanted to return His Majesty's jade pendant, but you directly broke it. Shunyu stopped and looked at the woman coldly. I thought everyone knew that I am a person who can't tolerate sand in my eyes. Don't let me know that you have ideas that you shouldn't have in the future, otherwise. The pressure in the young man's eyes was like a mountain. The woman had no doubt that if she really dared to do anything, her end would be the same as the jade pendant. She was too careless. She almost forgot that there was a woman who deliberately fell on His Majesty and was still detained in Yuzhang Palace. She began to feel fear in her heart. No matter how ambitious she was just an unmarried woman. In terms of knowledge, how could she compare with Shunyu? What's the noise? A man's low voice sounded from behind. Shunyu tilted his head and saw Shang Junlin coming from another direction. He was originally discussing things with the Prime Minister and several ministers. Suddenly, he received the news that a woman wanted to see him. She also said that she wanted to return his personal belongings. Shang Junlin directly sent the messenger away and didn't plan to come out to meet her. If he didn't hear that Shunyu went out, he would never come out. Greetings, Your Majesty. Everyone present bowed. Shang Junlin excused their salutations. He didn't even look at the delicate woman who was about to cry and walked straight to Shunyu. Are you feeling better today? Ever since that night, Shunyu had always been listless. Shang Junlin was extremely anxious. He only felt relieved after Imperial Physician Jiyu confirmed that Shunyu was fine. For the next few days, he did not dare to cause trouble. It was rare for Shunyu to have a good rest for a few days. His spirit had also slowly recovered. On the way here, Shang Junlin already had a rough idea of what had happened. She was just a stranger to him, so he was too lazy to waste his time on her. Shen Yu snuggled into Shang Junlin's arms. "Your Majesty, I broke your jade pendant, you won't blame me, right? Yu doesn't like it. It's just a jade pendant." Shang Junlin held Shen Yu's hand and put it in front of his eyes. "Is Yu injured?" Shen Yu was a little unhappy at first, but she was amused by Shang Junlin's action. "It's just a jade pendant. How can I be injured? Next time, if you don't like it, you can let the people around you break it. You don't have to do it yourself." Shang Junlin pinched Shen Yu's fingers. "That woman." Shen Yu looked sideways at the woman outside. The woman finally met Shang Junlin. She originally wanted to do something. It would be better if she could plant the seed of Shen Yu in Shang Junlin's heart. However, she didn't expect that Shang Junlin didn't care about the others at all. He didn't even look at her. The woman's face was pale and she was on the verge of collapse. However, no one pitied her because of her weakness. How many people from the palace were innocent? They could see the woman's true intentions at a glance. Now that she didn't achieve her goal and the emperor didn't punish her, why did she pretend to be bullied? Someone, send her back. She will be punished by copying the precepts for women. Order the elders in her family to take good care of her. I don't want the same thing to happen again. Yes. Also, Shang Junlin slowly rubbed Shen Yu's fingers. "Next time, don't let these people cause trouble in front of the emperor. If they disturb the emperor's mood, I will hold you responsible." "Yes. Your Majesty allowed these people to bring their family members here. It's a grace to them. Who would have thought that these people would have so many thoughts behind the scenes?" Shen Yu certainly knew that the woman wasn't the only one with such thoughts. Whether it was for power or for other reasons, there would always be moths to a flame. Shang Junlin was swift and decisive. He didn't leave any face for the woman. Not long after, everyone in the palace knew that the daughter of the assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue had failed in her attempt to get close to the emperor and had been disliked. The assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue flew into a rage. "Lock up this disgraceful thing. Without my permission, no one is allowed to let her out." He knew that his daughter had some thoughts. To be honest, he was also a bit moved. Looking at Shen Guojuan's current treatment, he knew that if his daughter entered the palace and was favored, what kind of glory would it be? Because of this, he didn't stop his daughter's actions. However, he didn't think that Shang Junlin would be so merciless. Now, who didn't know what his daughter had done? She received mocking looks from others. Because the assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue was born in an aristocratic family, his path had been paved by his elders. He was just waiting to be promoted to the Minister of Revenue. When had he ever encountered such a situation? Your Majesty is putting the face of the Tan family on the ground and stepping on it. The assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue fiercely downed a cup of wine. That's not all. Your Majesty has his own ideas. Do you really think that he's only targeting the Tan family? He clearly wants to use this matter to make an example out of us and warn us not to have thoughts that we shouldn't have. Your Majesty's prejudice against the aristocratic families isn't new. Originally, we planned to send more sensible aristocratic daughters into the palace to ease the tension between the two sides. Who would have thought that Your Majesty would be blinded by a man and not want anyone else? Our plan can only be put on hold. Allowing those rumors to spread was also a form of probing. In the past, the emperor lived in the depths of the palace and had almost no contact with the aristocratic daughters. In the palace, as long as the emperor wanted, he could see the aristocratic daughters at any time. Perhaps the emperor would change his mind after seeing how good the aristocratic daughters were. The emperor didn't care about those private rumors. Just when they thought they saw an opportunity, the emperor's fierce attack directly shattered their fantasies. The emperor didn't tacitly agree. He clearly wanted to find an opportunity to deal with it once and for all. After this, who would dare to have such thoughts? No matter what they thought, at least they wouldn't dare to show it. Every family would restrain their family and their subordinates. The aristocratic families couldn't afford to lose face. After Shang Junlin's outburst, Shen Yu didn't encounter similar things again. She also said that no one dared to talk about these things in private. Shun Yu was quite satisfied with this result. No one would be happy if their own people were constantly being targeted by others. Even during the hottest time of the year, the temperature in the palace wasn't too high. It was even a little cold at night. Finally, Shang Junlin wouldn't be despised when he hugged Shun Yu to sleep. A batch of memorials was sent from the capital every 3 days. Today was the day to send memorials again. Shun Yu watched Eunuch Meng instruct a group of eunuchs to move the memorials into the study room. Then, he moved the memorials out and sent them back to the imperial city. Why are there so many memorials this time? Shun Yu walked in and took a look. He was surprised. Those aristocratic families who stayed in the capital received news about the palace. Most of them are probably related to that incident. After Shang Junlin finished reading the memorials in his hand, he put down his pen and instructed, Meng Chang, sort these memorials and put the less important ones aside. Eunuch Meng deftly went to sort the memorials. Shang Junlin led Shun Yu out of the study room. The people in the capital have already used ice. The Ministry of Works asked me for the recipe to make ice, but I haven't given it to them yet. Now, the people who were arranged to make ice were all people from the imperial farmsteads. These farmsteads belonged to Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin had specially instructed them not to leak the recipe to make ice. Your Majesty, don't give it to them yet. Shun Yu suddenly thought of another use of saltpeter, to make weapons with great lethality. After the new department is established, I want to put the recipe there. Shang Junlin was talking about the Bureau of Natural Resources that was being prepared by the Imperial Court. It was independent of all the departments in the Imperial Court and directly under the Emperor. At the beginning, it was agreed that the officials in the Bureau of Natural Resources would not have the same power as the 6 ministries. After this plan was put forward, not many people opposed it, except for the Minister of Revenue. After the Bureau of Natural Resources was established, a lot of money was bound to be invested. The Minister of Revenue valued the money in the national treasury more than anyone else. He only wanted to spend every penny on the blade. I want the Bureau of Natural Resources to be completely separated from the Imperial Court. If the profits from the things made can be used as the cost of the next research, then we won't be restrained by any forces in the Imperial Court. I want a pure Bureau of Natural Resources that won't have too many entanglements with other officials. Shang Junlin explained his plan. Shun Yu felt that this was quite good. Did the Minister of Revenue impeach me again? Ever since that incident, the Minister of Revenue didn't like Shun Yu. He could find a reason to impeach Shun Yu no matter what he did. He also did a lot of things that deliberately distorted the facts. Don't worry. I will avenge you. Shang Junlin had also been eyeing the position of the Minister of Revenue for a long time. The two strolled to the lake. The lotus flowers in the lake were growing well. An exquisite boat was parked on the shore. Shun Yu pulled Shang Junlin over. Your Majesty, do you know how to row a boat? A little. Then he knew how to row a boat. Your Majesty, how about we row a boat? Seeing the interest in Shun Yu's eyes, Shang Junlin didn't refuse. Eunuch Meng wanted to call a few imperial bodyguards who knew how to row a boat over, but Shang Junlin refused. He got off the boat first, then took Shun Yu. The boat wasn't big, just enough to accommodate 2 people. Shang Junlin rowed the boat to the center of the lake and stopped. Shun Yu reached out to the lotus heads not far away. He successfully plucked one, broke it open, and put one into his mouth. It was so sweet. Shang Junlin saw that Shun Yu liked it, so he rowed the boat closer. He plucked some and put it beside Shun Yu. Yu likes it. When we go back, I'll ask the kitchen to make some lotus seed snacks for you. Do you have them in the palace? Of course. There are many different kinds of lotus flowers in the palace. The weather in the temporary imperial residence was cool. Even if the sun shone down, it wouldn't be too hot. Shang Junlin was afraid that Shun Yu would get sunburned, so he broke off a lotus leaf and held it above Shun Yu's head. Shun Yu ate the lotus head. It was sweet in his mouth. He peeled one and put it beside Shang Junlin's mouth. Your Majesty, have some too. Shun Yu's hands were very white. Under the sunlight, his fingers became more lustrous. It was hard to tell whether the lotus seed or his fingers were more attractive. Shang Junlin's Adam's apple bobbed up and down. Chapter 96. Shang Junlin lowered his head and sucked on the lotus seed along with Shen Yu's finger. After biting it gently, he released it. It's very sweet. Shen Yu didn't know if he was referring to the lotus seed or something else. Shen Yu withdrew his hand as if he was scalded. Under the man's increasingly aggressive gaze, his face gradually turned red. You, try it. After speaking, Shang Junlin leaned over, pulled the young man under his body, and kissed him. Shen Yu had just eaten the lotus seed. The sweetness of the lotus seed was like sweet dew in his mouth, tempting him to suck on it. The sweetness of the lotus seed lingered between their lips and teeth. Shang Junlin pressed Shen Yu down and deepened the kiss. The lotus leaves had unknowingly leaned to one side and covered their faces. After the kiss, Shang Junlin slightly distanced himself from Shen Yu. One of his hands was still on Shen Yu's back, supporting him from falling down. Shen Yu was panting slightly, and there was a touch of rouge at the corners of his eyes. Shang Junlin's eyes became darker and darker. Shen Yu felt Shang Junlin's interest and turned his head. Your Majesty, Eunuch Meng and the others are still on the shore. If you lower your voice, they won't find out. Shang Junlin raised his hand and brushed away Shen Yu's messy hair. His fingers lingered. No. Shen Yu refused without thinking. Your Majesty, how many days do you want me to lie down this time? This time, I won't do it like last time, okay? Shang Junlin knew that he had indeed gone too far that day. Except for not really going in, Shen Yu had been bullied by him from top to bottom. Shen Yu looked around. The place where they were was surrounded by lotus leaves, far from the shore. No one on the shore could see what they were doing. Didn't the imperial physician say that Your Majesty should control yourself? Recalling that night, Shen Yu didn't want to agree. He was not averse to this kind of thing, but if it was like last time, then forget it. His body could not withstand Shang Junlin's torment. How long has it been since I last messed with you? Shang Junlin lowered his head and rubbed against the young man like a big clingy dog. Shen Yu was annoyed by him. The two of them were so close together that any of their reactions would be easily detected by the other party. Shang Junlin sensed something and leaned on Shen Yu's shoulder, laughing softly. Yu wants it too, doesn't she? I don't want to. Shen Yu glared at him. If he hadn't rubbed against him, would he have become like this? Okay, I promise. Just once, okay? Shang Junlin did not give up. His warm breath sprayed on Shen Yu's neck. Shen Yu had no choice but to relent. Only once, with your hands. Like a dog that had eaten meat, Shang Junlin's eyes suddenly lit up. The unrowed boat swayed gently, ripples of water rippling under the boat. Shen Yu bit her lips to prevent the sound from overflowing. The man's lips lingered on her neck, all the way up, swallowing all the sound into his stomach. The sun gradually set in the west. The palace servants waiting by the shore looked anxiously at the center of the lake from time to time. Mu Shi looked anxiously for a while and asked, Eunuch Meng, do we need to find Her Majesty and Gui Jun? It had been so long, why was there no movement at all? Eunuch Meng could not make up his mind. Without Her Majesty's orders, they could not act rashly. Wait a little longer. If Her Majesty and Gui Jun do not come out before dark, we will send people to find them. Shen Yu's body moved up and down with the rocking of the boat. She struggled to avoid the man's kiss. Her Majesty said that she would only. I didn't lie. Be good, come closer. Shang Junlin nibbled the delicate skin on Shen Yu's neck and coaxed in a hoarse voice. He didn't lie, but it took a little longer. Shen Yu was so angry that she bit Shang Junlin. The man paused for a moment, then became even more ruthless. Just as Eunuch Meng was hesitating whether to send the guards to find them, a small boat slowly appeared in front of them. Eunuch Meng took the lead to welcome it. Shang Junlin carried the young man wrapped in a black robe and got off the boat. Eunuch Meng quickly ordered people to stop the boat and walked behind Shang Junlin. Your Majesty, go back first. The man's voice was full of satisfaction. Eunuch Meng tactfully stopped talking and followed behind Shang Junlin with his head lowered. Inadvertently, He saw an arm hanging down from the black robe. The white skin was covered with red marks. Eunuch Meng hurriedly looked away and did not dare to look anymore. Shen Yu was not asleep. His leg only hurt. What surprised him more was that Shang Junlin actually carried those small bottles with him. "Why did your majesty bring these?" Shen Yu half leaned on the bed and played with the jade bottle in his hand. He took it out from Shang Junlin's robe. One bottle was fine, but Shang Junlin actually brought several bottles. The jade bottle was thin and long. As it was played with by the fair and slender fingers, it seemed to have some kind of arousal. Shang Junlin thought of the pair of hands that held him just now. The skin on the palms was tender and slightly cold to the touch. He was addicted to the taste. "Your Majesty." Seeing that he was distracted, Shen Yu stopped what he was doing. Shang Junlin coughed softly. "I just thought that it would be more convenient to carry it with me." What was convenient? Shen Yu did not want to think about it. Shang Junlin suddenly reached out and held Shen Yu's hand. Together with the bottle in his hand, he wrapped it in his palm. Do you feel uncomfortable now?" "I'm fine. Except for a few places." This time, it was indeed fine. When he woke up the next day, Shen Yu was in good spirits. Except for some places that were still a little uncomfortable, compared to the last time, there were no sequelae. "Young master, Her Majesty sent people to deliver a lot of lotus seeds." She led people to move the lotus seeds into the room. There were indeed a lot. Shen Yu counted silently. It was enough for him to eat for a few days. Shang Junlin was still worried about Shen Yu, so he called Imperial Physician Ji Yu over the next day. "Your Majesty's body is fine," Imperial Physician Ji Yu said after taking his pulse. Shen Yu also felt that he was fine. "I told you that there was no need to trouble Imperial Physician Ji Yu to make a trip. Let Imperial Physician Ji Yu take a look. I'm more at ease." After that, Imperial Physician Ji Yu was invited to the study to ask about Shen Yu's physical condition in detail. In the middle of the night, Shen Yu was awakened by the noise. Shang Junlin patted his back. "I'll go take a look. You can continue sleeping." After that, Shang Junlin put on his coat and went out. Shen Yu lay down for a while but couldn't fall asleep. He simply sat up and asked Shi to light the lamp. "What's the situation outside?" "It seems that a minister's residence caught fire." Shi had been waiting outside the room. She heard the news from a palace servant. How could it catch fire? The emperor and important ministers of the imperial court lived in the palace. Which one of them wasn't a noble? The servants were always very careful. It was almost impossible for such a big accident to happen. Shen Yu put on a cloak and walked outside. At a glance, he saw the blazing fire. This direction seems to be the residence of a certain aristocratic family. Shen Yu muttered. "It's the residence of the assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue." "Why did you come out?" Shang Junlin walked in from outside and directly pulled Shen Yu into his arms. At night, the temperature in the palace was low. Shen Yu nestled in the man's arms for a while and gradually felt warm. "I couldn't sleep, so I came out to take a look. I've already arranged for someone to put out the fire." "Don't worry." Shang Junlin touched Shen Yu's hair. The fire in the palace was not a trivial matter. Whether it was man-made or accidental, it needed to be thoroughly investigated. Shang Junlin sent Shen Yu back to his room to continue resting. He went to meet the ministers. The Prime Minister and others had been waiting in the study for a while. After Shang Junlin came in, he sat in his seat and knocked on the table. "What do you think of tonight's incident?" The answer given by Lord Tan is that the servants accidentally knocked down the candle flame and the house burned. Fortunately, it was discovered early and didn't cause too much damage. "Who was injured?" "Except for Miss Tan's face, everyone else is fine." "Do you think it was an accident?" "In my opinion, it doesn't seem like it." "Why was Miss Tan the one who was injured, and after such an incident?" "Because Shang Junlin wanted to punish the chicken to warn the monkey. He didn't hide what happened that day from the public. Now, only a few days after the incident, Miss Tan almost died in the fire. No one would think that it was a coincidence." In the small courtyard of the Tan family, Miss Tan had just been rescued from the fire. She was still in shock and leaned in the arms of a servant girl. She knew better than anyone that tonight's fire was not an accident. If she hadn't been on guard, she wouldn't have been able to walk out alive. She touched the untreated wound on her face, and her eyes were obscure. "You're so embarrassing. You even embarrassed yourself in front of His Majesty. If you don't have the life, don't have such ambition. In the end, you'll only implicate us." The Tan family's legitimate daughter looked at Miss Tan condescendingly. Her tone was full of sarcasm. "You're really lucky to be able to escape from such a fire." Miss Tan silently clenched her fists. "Father, in my opinion, we should just send away those careless servants. No one was injured anyway." The Tan family's legitimate daughter had always disliked her younger sister, who was born of a concubine. It wasn't because of the difference between legitimate and concubine, but because her good sister was like her yin-yang. They liked to pretend to be weak. Every time she did something wrong or wanted something, as long as she put on a bullied face, she would get what she wanted. This time, she was even more daring. She went directly to His Majesty and didn't even look at herself. She dared to covet that position. The result was that the Tan family became the laughingstock of everyone. "All right," the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Revenue scolded. "Call a doctor for your sister to look at her face." The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Revenue didn't want to look at this disgraceful daughter and left with a flick of his sleeve. When he thought of explaining these things to His Majesty, he had a headache. But he couldn't not go. When Shang Junlin returned, the sky was already bright. Shun Yu didn't sleep well in the latter half of the night and got up early. The servant made lotus seed porridge and presented it to her. The snow-white lotus seeds floated in the bowl. Shun Yu used a spoon to poke at them. "Why are you up so early?" Shang Junlin walked in. "Mu Shi, go and bring a bowl of porridge for His Majesty." After Shun Yu gave the order, she answered Shang Junlin's question, "I couldn't sleep." "How is the matter being handled?" "For the time being, we only found out that it was an accident." The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Revenue also insisted that it was a servant's mistake and didn't intend to investigate further. Shang Junlin sat beside Shen Yu. The palace servants quickly brought the lotus seed porridge over. "His Majesty, have some too." Shang Junlin picked up the porridge and finished it in a few bites. Shen Yu also put down the bowl and wiped her mouth with a handkerchief. The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Revenue is standing at the cusp of the storm. He hopes more than anyone that this is just an accident. After the palace servants finished cleaning up, Shang Junlin pulled Shen Yu's hand and walked to the bed. "Are you, sleep with me for a while?" Shen Yu thought that he didn't sleep for most of the night and didn't refuse. After changing clothes, Shang Junlin hugged Shen Yu and lay down on the bed. "It's still more comfortable to stay with a Yu." She was soft and fragrant when he hugged her. Even if he didn't do anything, Shang Junlin could hug her for a whole day. On the other side, in the study room with the doors and windows tightly shut, the middle-aged man asked in a deep voice, "How is the matter?" "Rest assured, my lord. I have already spread the news according to your request. When the sky is bright, everything will be as you wish." Chapter 97. Shun Yu lay in the man's warm arms and soon fell asleep. Shang Junlin looked down at him. He didn't feel sleepy at first, but after looking at Shun Yu's peaceful sleeping face for a while, he gradually felt sleepy. Not long after, Shang Junlin also fell asleep with him in his arms. After sleeping for a while, Shun Yu woke up feeling refreshed. He touched his side and found that Shang Junlin was not there. He must be busy with government affairs. Hearing the noise, Mu Shi came in to serve him. After washing up, Shun Yu took a book and asked, "Did something happen? Your expression didn't look right when you came in." Mu Shi pursed her lips and didn't know if she should tell Shun Yu. Shun Yu rolled up the book and gently knocked on her head. "Tell me, what happened?" "It's outside. People are saying that you ordered someone to set the fire last night." Mu Shi was indignant. "You didn't do anything. How can these people slander you for no reason?" Shun Yu restrained the smile on his face and sat on the soft couch with the book. "Tell me the details." "This morning, when I went out, I heard people secretly saying that there was something wrong with the fire last night. Someone deliberately set it to get rid of Miss Tan. Otherwise, why would Miss Tan's room catch fire among so many rooms? It was indeed man-made, but I don't know the real purpose of the person behind the scenes. Shun Yu hid the deep thought in his eyes. It's not a big deal for them to talk about this, but for some reason, they all suddenly agreed that it was you who set the fire. They said it was because you couldn't tolerate other people around His Majesty, and she couldn't continue. Shun Yu picked up the teacup and took a sip. Continue. They said that His Majesty originally took a fancy to Miss Tan and wanted to bring her into the palace, but you refused. You even had a big fight with His Majesty and drove Miss Tan out. You also spread rumors to tarnish Miss Tan's reputation. Hearing this, Shun Yu understood that the ultimate target of this fire was him. Does His Majesty know? Shun Yu asked. I found out early this morning. Before His Majesty left, he told us not to disturb your rest. Didn't he tell you not to tell me about this? No. She shook her head. She only told us not to worry if you knew about it. Her Majesty will take care of it. How many people think so now? Other than those who serve here, it's spreading everywhere else. When she heard the rumors, he immediately went outside to inquire about the news. The more he heard, the angrier he became. Young master, don't worry. His Majesty has already sent people to deal with it. Shun Yu shook his head. For this kind of thing, if we can't come up with a truth that is enough to convince them, it won't really stop. As the saying goes, 3 men make a tiger. Even if he didn't do it, the more people who talked about it, the more they would implicate him. This was probably one of the motives of the mastermind. Shun Yu was right. Even though Shang Junlin ordered people not to talk about it in private, the rumors didn't disappear immediately. Instead, they spread more and more. Not only in the temporary imperial residence, but also in the capital. Shang Junlin received the secret message from the hidden dragon guards. His eyes were clouded and the air pressure around him was getting lower and lower. Call the Tan family members over. Eunuch Meng didn't dare to delay. He called the Tan family members over as fast as he could. Official Tan and Miss Tan, who had just had ointment applied on her face, came over. Have you heard the rumors outside? Shang Junlin sat on the throne and said coldly. Your Majesty, I am innocent. Official Tan knelt down in fear. I don't know where the rumors came from. I can swear that I didn't do it. I don't know anything. Miss Tan knelt down silently and didn't say anything. Is that so? Shang Junlin's voice was indiscernible. Then why did the rumors come from the servants of the Tan family? I really don't know. Your Majesty, please understand. Official Tan kowtowed heavily. There was only fear in his heart. When he heard the rumors, Official Tan's heart turned cold. Even if he was given 10 guts, he wouldn't have dared to spread such rumors. Everyone knew that Shen Guijun was His Majesty's most beloved person. Was he trying to court death by doing such a thing? Shang Junlin also knew that Official Tan didn't do it. Official Tan didn't have the guts to do it. He turned to look at one of the people involved. Did you notice anything wrong last night? This humble girl is certain that someone wants this humble girl's life. The lady, whose expression couldn't be seen clearly, suddenly raised her head. Last night, after I fell asleep, I vaguely felt that someone was walking around in the room. There was also a conversation that was suppressed. I didn't hear what they were saying. Not long after, the room was on fire. There is one more thing. I don't know if it counts. Before I fell asleep last night, an unfamiliar servant girl brought me a bowl of bloody swallow's nest. She said that my father saw that I was injured and specially sent someone to bring it to me. I felt that something was wrong, so I didn't eat the bowl of swallow's nest. I didn't dare to sleep too deeply at night. If she ate the swallow's nest and it happened to be drugged with sleeping pills, she would most likely have died in the fire. Shang Junlin ordered people to watch over the Tan family. There were many suspicious points in this matter, especially when it involved Shen Yu. Shang Junlin couldn't remain rational. Your Majesty, don't frown. Shen Yu reached out and smoothed out the wrinkles between the man's eyebrows. Shang Junlin took the opportunity to hug Shen Yu. He buried his head in his neck and took a deep breath. I would rather they wanted to deal with me. His Yu was so good that he didn't dare to hurt her in the slightest. Those people were bold and directly used such a vicious method to deal with him. The more Shang Junlin thought about it, the lower the pressure around him became. When he caught those people, he would definitely let them know what it meant to live a life worse than death. Shun Yu stroked Shang Junlin's back. "All right, Your Majesty, don't be angry. There is nothing to be angry about. It was just slander." What kind of words had he not heard before? When he worked for King Yu in his previous life, he had been scolded by all kinds of people. Compared to that, this was nothing. "I won't allow them to talk about a Yu like that. A Yu is so good, how can I let them slander her? They don't deserve it." Shun Yu's heart warmed. She relaxed in the man's arms. "Does Your Majesty know who did it?" Shang Junlin didn't have many clues. "Your Majesty, do you want to know who did it?" Shun Yu blinked her eyes. "A Yu knows." Shang Junlin raised his head and looked at him curiously. "I don't know now, but I will know soon." Shun Yu smiled and whispered into Shang Junlin's ear. "A Yu is really..." Shang Junlin laughed. "Your Majesty, just do what you need to do. As for the rest, you just need to lend me a few hidden dragon guards." This matter was not only limited to the officials on the surface. Shang Junlin had also instructed the hidden dragon guards to investigate. The Tan family was placed under surveillance, and every servant was interrogated. Their hard work paid off. They finally found a clue. The rumors became more and more intense. It was to the point where they could hear people talking about it everywhere they went. "Everything is going according to your expectations. I believe that in time, your wish will come true." The subordinate complimented him. "You have done well this time. After this matter is settled, the things that I promised you will belong to you." "Thank you, Your Majesty." The subordinate was delighted. "You may leave. Keep an eye on the situation outside." "Yes." Imperial physician Jiyu and Jiyu Huai also heard the discussion about this matter. "I believe that Your Majesty is not such a person." Imperial physician Jiyu had been in contact with Shun Yu for a period of time. He trusted Shun Yu's character. "Brother is right. If Your Majesty really wants to deal with Miss Tan, why would he use such a stupid method?" In the short period of time that they had spent together, Jiyu Huai clearly understood that Shun Yu was not a fool who would do such a stupid thing because of jealousy. "It is probably to sow discord between Your Majesty and Your Majesty. Your Majesty has been in the palace for so long and has always dominated Your Majesty. Your Majesty also dotes on Your Majesty and refuses to take in concubines. Those who want to send their daughters to stabilize their status can no longer sit still." Imperial physician Jiyu sighed. "I don't know if Your Majesty will believe Your Majesty. Those people don't think about it. If Your Majesty doesn't like them, what's the use of sending them into the palace? They will not get any benefits and will be implicated instead." Jiyu Huai was very disdainful of this kind of behavior that used women to gain status and power. It is a pity that some people are blinded by power and will never understand this point. Jiyu Huai nodded in agreement. The people behind the scenes wanted to wait until the day when Shun Yu would be neglected by Shang Junlin. Unfortunately, after waiting and waiting, Shun Yu and Shang Junlin got along as usual. Even Shang Junlin was more clingy than before because he was worried about Shun Yu. This was different from what he had imagined. When the people behind the scenes saw the news from their informants, they were so angry that they wanted to vomit blood. "Daran, Your Majesty summons you." A servant's voice came from outside the room. He hurriedly put away the letter beside him and strode out of the room. When he arrived, he found that there was no one else except for Shang Junlin and Shun Yu. "Your Majesty, Your Majesty." Shang Junlin didn't say anything, so he could only kneel. Gradually, uneasiness surged in his heart. "Daran Yi, I don't think there is much hatred between you and me, right?" Shun Yu's calm voice broke the silence. Daran Yi's heart palpitated. "I don't know what Your Majesty is talking about. Otherwise, why would Daran Yi commit arson and injure people and point all the evidence to me?" Shun Yu looked at him calmly. The uneasiness in Daran Yi's heart gradually increased. He forced himself to remain calm and said, "Even if you are Your Majesty, you can't slander a court official." He did it very cleanly. Even if he gave himself away, he would only point all the evidence to Shen Yu. It would be impossible for him to be discovered. Whether it is the truth or slander, Darren Yi knows better than anyone else. If you don't want people to know, don't do it in the first place. Shen Yu stood up and walked in front of the kneeling man. Darren Yi has read so many books. Don't you understand this simple principle? It seems that Darren Yi still refuses to admit it. Shen Yu sighed in distress. Darren Yi is so confident that we won't be able to find any evidence. Darren Yi stiffened his neck and didn't speak. In fact, we won't be able to find anything. Who asked Darren Yi to personally send the evidence to us? The blood swallow's nest is such a precious tonic. Darren Tan would never give it to a concubine's daughter who brought shame to the family. Not every aristocratic family has the Yi family's background. Of course, one swallow's nest doesn't mean anything. What if we add this? Shen Yu took out a rolled-up piece of paper from his sleeve. There was a special pattern printed at the end of the paper. It was used by Darren Yi to send messages to the capital. How did you get this? Darren Yi reached out to take it, but Shen Yu withdrew his hand. Now you are willing to admit it. Chapter 98. Lord Yi's actions were tantamount to admitting Shen Yu's words. His expression changed again and again as he slowly retracted his hand. He had seen the seal on the paper very clearly. It was used to contact the people in the capital. The detailed arrangements to incite the people to slander Shen Yu were all sent to the people in the capital through this seal. Now that Shen Yu was holding one of them, did he have the other one as well? This was not the only thing he had written in the letter to the capital. There were many other things that could not be known by outsiders. Lord Yi's face turned ashen when he thought of the consequences if His Majesty found out. Do you admit to your crimes? Lord Yi, who had been immersed in his thoughts, was startled awake by the cold voice. He looked forward in panic. After a moment, he kowtowed heavily. I admit to my crimes. As expected, Shen Yu put away the letter in his hand and walked slowly back to Shang Junlin's side. He sat down. Why are you targeting me? As far as I know, the Yi family has no plans to send their children into the palace. After the incident with the Tan girl, Shang Junlin had sent people to investigate which worlds had taken action. The Yi family was not among them. It could be said that the Yi family had never had such thoughts. Lord Yi was silent. Shen Yu cracked his fingers. Let me guess. It's because of Yi Jianming? Since there was no conflict of interest in the harem, he must have done something unfavorable to the Yi family elsewhere. Shen Yu searched his memories. This was the only thing that matched. Yi Jianming was stripped of his imperial results and will never be able to become an official. Your family spent a lot of effort to nurture him. Unfortunately, before he could do anything for the family, he was abandoned. You were unhappy and targeted me. Do you think that if I had not appeared at the Chonglin banquet, His Majesty would not have punished Yi Jianming? Shen Yu's every word pierced through Lord Yi's heart. He had never failed like this in his entire life. Yi Jianming was the child he valued the most. He liked him the most among the younger generation of the Yi family. Yi Jianming's intelligence was not inferior to others. He had high hopes for his successor, but because of a small matter, he was ruined. How could he take this lying down? After that incident, although Yi Jianming did not suffer any physical injuries, the child's mental state had undergone a huge change. He was muddle-headed all day long and did not look like a young master of an aristocratic family at all. As for the people who went to the Chonglin banquet with Yi Jianming, of course, he did not let them go. They were just some small family clans that relied on the Yi family. It would be easy to deal with them. Since Your Majesty and Your Highness already know everything, I have nothing more to say. Lord Yi slumped to the ground. Shen Yu was not surprised that they would make a move against Jiang Huiqing, who seemed to have no foundation at all. The imperial court was like this. It was always accompanied by mutual deception, open strife and covert struggle. Political opponents fought to the death. The imperial court seemed to be stable now, but it was the result of Shang Junlin's efforts to balance the situation. I want to know, how did Your Highness get the letter? The thing that made Lord Yi unable to quibble was the rolled-up letter that Shun Yu took out. He would only choose his most trusted subordinates to send letters. Once they found out, they would destroy the letter at all costs. No one else knew how the letter was sent. How did the letter end up in Shun Yu's hands? Lord Yi was puzzled. You're asking about this? Shun Yu's eyes swept downwards. What do you think? Lord Yi was taken away by the guards waiting outside. Before he left, he did not get a reply from Shun Yu. Of course, Shun Yu wouldn't tell him that he was the one who used the letter to scare him. A Yu's imitation skills are really good. Shang Junlin's hand reached into Shun Yu's sleeve and took out the letter that made Lord Yi's expression change greatly. His fingertips slid across her soft skin, causing her to tremble. Shang Junlin hugged Shun Yu from behind. Then, he wrapped his arms around her waist and stretched them forward to unfold the letter. If Lord Yi was here and saw the letter being unfolded, he would definitely scold them for being shameless. Besides the pattern that Shun Yu drew at the end of the letter, there was nothing else on the letter. In the beginning, they did not have any clue about the mastermind behind this incident. Later, Shang Junlin listened to Shun Yu's suggestion and asked the hidden dragon guards to secretly search for the mastermind behind this incident. They really caught the person who delivered the message. However, when the person realized that he had been discovered, he immediately destroyed the letter. The hidden dragon guards brought back the news and the destroyed letter. Shun Yu pieced together the pattern and created a similar letter. However, a fake letter was still a fake. If Lord Yi was not distracted by Shun Yu's words, he might have realized that something was wrong. Unfortunately, there was no if. The rumors in the capital have been controlled. Now that the mastermind has been found, it's time to deal with the situation in the palace. If Shun Yu did not want to lure the mastermind out, Shang Junlin would not have allowed the rumors to circulate in the palace for so many days. How does your majesty plan to deal with this? Shun Yu's wrist was held. The man's calloused fingertips caressed the inside of his wrist, causing him to feel numb. If it was in the past, Shang Junlin would definitely kill the person who spread the rumors. However, he knew that Shun Yu did not like this. After a moment of silence, he asked, "How does a Yu plan to deal with them?" Shun Yu turned and looked at Shang Junlin. "Your Majesty can do whatever you want with the leaders. As for the rest of them, they will be fined 1 year's salary as a warning to others." The rumors disappeared as quickly as they appeared. In less than half a day, no one in the palace dared to talk about it anymore. As for the capital, Shang Junlin had already ordered people to suppress the rumors. The people in the capital were not as gullible as Lord Yi thought. After what Lord Yi had done spread to the capital, everyone was enlightened. I said before that Lord Yi would not do such a thing. Look, the results are out now. Lord Yi was indeed framed. This Lord Yi, could it be that he is related to Yi Jianming, who was jealous of a poor student and wanted to get his results revoked? They both have the surname Yi. What do you think? No wonder he wanted to slander Lord Yi. If it was not for Lord Yi, that poor student would have been bullied by others. His words were met with agreement. There were many aristocratic families in the capital, but there were even more ordinary people. These aristocratic families were used to being superior and thought that they were superior. The ordinary people did not have a good impression of them. Compared with the aristocratic families, they were more likely to bring in poor students. Not only this, have you forgotten that fraud was discovered in time before the imperial examination? It was Lord Yi who discovered it first. Lord Yi is so considerate. How could he kill a woman because of jealousy? When those words were first spread, I felt that something was wrong. Before Lord Yi entered the palace, His Majesty's harem did not have many women. After Lord Yi entered the palace, His Majesty said that he only wanted Lord Yi in this life. How could he like another woman in the blink of an eye and take her into his harem? If His Majesty really wanted to, his harem would have been full. A few years ago, the ministers did mention this matter. Don't you think it is suspicious? So there is no such thing as His Majesty taking in new people. Since there is no such thing, Lord Yi's jealousy and arson cannot be established. I have a cousin who works in an aristocratic family. Did you know that a few days ago, the aristocratic family was reprimanded by His Majesty? The reason was that a woman from an aristocratic family deliberately got close to His Majesty and was punished. The person who punished her was not Lord Yi, but His Majesty himself. At this point, everything that should be understood was clear. The cause and effect relationship was wrong from the beginning. Since this was the case, no matter how dignified the reason behind it would not hold water. Restaurants and tea houses were all talking about this matter. Under the deliberate influence of some people, the wind quickly reversed. The truth is finally out. I knew that Brother Yu was not that kind of person. Jiang Huiqing heard the discussion downstairs and poured a cup of wine for himself. He Chengyu picked up the wine cup and took a sip. The relationship between His Majesty and Lord Yi is stronger than gold. It is not something that can be casually interfered with. That's right. I don't know what these aristocratic families are thinking. His Majesty has already made it clear that he will not fill up the harem, but they still don't stop. Since ancient times, wealth and power have moved people's hearts. What they want is the power behind His Majesty. The aristocratic family's appetite is getting bigger and bigger. Jiang Huiqing knew this as well. Only after stepping into the imperial court did he realize that the interior of the Great Huan dynasty was vastly different from what he had imagined. The seemingly stable exterior was only supported by a strong pillar. Once this pillar collapsed, it was only a matter of time before the Great Huan dynasty collapsed. He also understood why His Majesty would put poor officials in important positions. It was not because he liked them, but because the court had been controlled by the aristocratic families for a long time. If there was no power to oppose them, the imperial power would become a joke sooner or later. Official Yi was sent back early, and the crimes he committed were also announced to the world. The Yi family's power in the capital was quickly divided up by other aristocratic families. The competition between aristocratic families is even worse than that between aristocratic families and poor families. If you think that they will be united, then you are gravely mistaken. Shunyu put down a white piece. Under the shade of a tree, Shang Junlin and Shunyu sat opposite each other. Between them was a red sandalwood chessboard. Shang Junlin had specially ordered the palace servants to find it in the storeroom. Shang Junlin held a black piece and put it down. In fact, the aristocratic families and the imperial family are not much different. In the previous dynasty, during the war, there was a saying that the aristocratic families are made of iron and the imperial family is flowing water. Before Da Huan was founded, this land had experienced 100 years of war. It was not until Da Huan was founded that the situation improved. Your Majesty, I am going to win. On the chessboard, as the last white piece was put down, the situation instantly reversed. The white pieces, which were originally at a disadvantage, quickly surrounded the black pieces and cut off all their escape routes. Shang Junlin threw back the piece in his hand and said crisply, I admit defeat. Your Majesty, you have lost today. You have to keep your word. Of course, I will not disturb you tonight. Shunyu breathed a sigh of relief. Seeing that his body did not have any abnormalities after that time, Shang Junlin wanted to disturb him every time. He called it getting used to it. Shunyu felt that he did not want to get used to this kind of thing. Your Majesty, Eunuch Meng walked over quickly with a rare look of panic on his face. Zun Jiao, official Zun wants to see you. Let him come in to see me. Eunuch Meng took the order and left. Not long after, a slightly embarrassed man in his 30s came in. Your Majesty, the north is suffering from a drought. Your Majesty, please send relief as soon as possible. Chapter 99. Subei was the name of several cities in the northern part of the Great Huan dynasty. In the early years, Shang Junlin had left some men there to fight. Later, when he returned to the capital and shifted his focus, he did not completely let go. Officials like Zun Jiao were all arranged by him to stay in Subei. What's going on? Shang Junlin did not receive any news of the drought in Subei. Otherwise, he would not have stayed in the temporary imperial residence as if nothing had happened. Mu Shi, first serve official Zun a pot of tea. Shunyu saw that Zun Jiao was travel-worn. It was obvious that he had rushed back. Zun Jiao was indeed thirsty. When Mu Shi brought the tea over, He did not refuse and directly drank it in one gulp. Only then did he slowly explain the situation in Subei. 3 months ago, it rarely rained in Subei, but at that time, it would occasionally rain a little. Subei has always been like this, so this subject did not take it to heart. Until a month ago, Subei began to have continuous sunny days. For a month, there was not a single drop of rain. The crops could not withstand the drought and died one after another. The people in Subei were short of food. This subject had no other choice but to take out a portion of the army's rations to help the people and send a memorial to the imperial court in hopes of receiving some assistance. Subei was an important pass in the northern part of the Great Huan dynasty. If the Subei army was not stationed there all year round, it would be easy for the nomads to invade the Great Huan dynasty. However, the living conditions in Subei were very bad. There was little rain and drought all year round. If the Subei army was not stationed there and the imperial court sent a batch of supplies there every year, it would be very difficult for ordinary people to survive. We did not receive your memorial. Shang Junlin's voice was cold. No one knew where the memorial requesting for disaster relief was now. This subject also guessed that the memorial might not have been delivered, so I rushed back. This subject returned to the capital without being summoned and is willing to accept punishment. Zun Jiao had been by Shang Junlin's side since before he ascended the throne. He naturally knew that Shang Junlin could not ignore Subei. There was only one possibility for him not to receive a reply from the imperial court after waiting for so many days. His memorial did not reach Shang Junlin's hands. Shang Junlin knocked on the stone table. This is an urgent matter. We will arrange for someone to go to Subei. You can go and rest first. This was his action when he was thinking. Before Zun Jiao came here, he was prepared to be condemned. His confidants had repeatedly advised him not to take the risk. If his memorial reached His Majesty's hands and nothing happened here, he would only end up not being able to return. Of course, Zun Jiao knew that he could afford to wait, but Subei couldn't. Neither the army nor the people of Subei could afford to wait. He took out the booklet that he had been keeping in his bosom. This subject has written down the disaster situation in Subei. Eunuch Meng took the booklet and presented it to Shang Junlin. We understand. Meng Chang, bring Lord Zun to the west courtyard. Don't spread what happened today. Your servant obeys. What do you think, Your Majesty? Shun Yu was not in the capital at this time in his previous life. He also fell seriously ill, so he did not know much about what happened this summer. As for the book he read after his death, it was written from Shen Qingran's perspective. The only description of this period of time was that he was bullied in the palace. Zun Jiao would not lie about this kind of thing. Not only Zun Jiao, but we also did not receive any memorials from any other officials in Subei. It seems that there is a big problem in Subei. If there is a problem with the officials in Subei, this matter is not as simple as just disaster relief. We will send the hidden dragon guards to investigate. As for the specifics, we will decide when the hidden dragon guards return. Shang Junlin flipped open the booklet. The more he read, the tighter his frown became. The disaster in Subei was more serious than expected. Starving people were everywhere, and people were swapping their children for food. Every scene was shocking. Shang Junlin was holding Shen Yu when he read the booklet. Shen Yu also happened to read the description on the booklet. When Zun Jiao wrote the booklet, he did not put too much personal emotion into it. He tried to write it as calmly and directly as possible. He only revealed a trace of emotion when he could not control it. It was precisely this kind of emotion that was revealed when he was suppressed to the extreme that could touch people's hearts. Your Majesty, let's arrange the disaster relief first. Otherwise, Subei would collapse on its own before the enemy attacked. Shang Junlin had already made a decision in his heart. He rested his head on Shen Yu's shoulder and rubbed his face against Shen Yu. We originally wanted to have fun here for a few days. After such a thing happened, they must return to the palace immediately. After all, there were many inconveniences in the temporary imperial residence. As long as I'm with Your Majesty, it's the same everywhere. Shen Yu rubbed against him back. That night, Shang Junlin ordered them to return to the capital ahead of time. The ministers also knew about the incident in Subei and packed up their belongings as quickly as possible. Early the next morning, the mighty group sped up and returned to the capital. Shunyu sat in the carriage and lifted the curtain to look outside. They had only stayed in the temporary imperial residence for 20 days. If they returned now, the capital would still be very hot. After going down the mountain, the temperature gradually increased. Shunyu changed into thin clothes and put a small basin of ice in the carriage, but she still felt very hot. The first half of August was one of the hottest periods in the capital. Originally, they would stay in the temporary imperial residence until the end of August and return when the capital was not so hot. However, their plan could not keep up with the changes. After such a big incident in Subei, they could only return to the capital ahead of time. The ministers did not dare to complain. They all knew the importance of Subei. Compared to temporary enjoyment, they certainly wanted long-term stability. They did not want to experience the turbulent situation when the previous emperor was on the throne again. The capital received the news early. The Ministry of Revenue prepared disaster relief materials according to Shang Junlin's decree. When the large group returned to the capital, the Ministry of Revenue had already taken care of everything. Although the Minister of Revenue was very stingy when the Minister of Works asked for money, when it came to disaster relief, he would not hesitate to spend more money. Shang Junlin summoned the ministers for a meeting, so Shunyu returned to Yuzhong Palace. Even if the master was not there, everything in Yuzhong Palace was the same as before. Shunyu looked at the pots of flowers that were growing well and sat by the window. Did something like this happen in his previous life? How was it resolved in the end? In that book, Shun Qingran's incident in the Imperial Palace was only briefly mentioned. Shunyu could only recall the memories of his previous life over and over again. It was already 9 months later when he recovered from the serious illness. It was said that the tyrant killed many ministers and his reputation among the people fell a step. What about before that? His memories seemed to be covered by a layer of fog. He could not see clearly. Gongzi, do you want to try the new snacks made by the kitchen? Mu Shi's words pulled Shunyu's thoughts back. Shunyu looked at the colorful glass bowl that Mu Shi was holding. What is it? I heard that it was inspired by Miss Shunyu. It was made with fresh fruits and small ice cubes. Knowing that Gongzi likes sweet things, they also added honey in it. Shunyu was curious about the snacks made of ice cubes. Let me see. The bowl was only the size of a palm. When it was close, Shunyu found that the bowl was transparent. It was just that the color was darker and could not be seen from a distance. This bowl. Shunyu took the bowl in his hand. His fingertips touched a piece of ice cold. In the bowl, there were fine ice cubes and small pieces of various fruits. Under the droplets of water that had not yet fallen, they were bright and juicy. They looked very appetizing. This glass bowl is a newly made product. It is said that it was made according to Shunyu's recipe. I heard that Miss Shunyu has a whole set of transparent and colorless bowls. It is just that the shape is very strange. It must be the glass that Shunyu mentioned before. Shunyu took a spoonful of fruit and put it into his mouth. It was cold when it entered his mouth. The freshness of the fruit did not decrease because of the coldness. Instead, it had a different taste. Moreover, it was cold and very comfortable to eat. It is indeed a pleasure to eat such snacks in summer. Go and ask the kitchen to make more. I will send some to His Majesty later. Unconsciously, Shunyu had finished a whole bowl of snacks. He was somewhat unsatisfied, but he also knew that his body did not allow him to eat more. Yes. After eating some iced drinks, Shunyu was not as agitated as before. He simply took a pen and paper and painted aimlessly. Shunyu was proficient in zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting. In his previous life, in order to better help the King of Yu, he learned everything that he could. No matter how much Count Zhenbei did not care about him, the son of the first wife, he still found a teacher to teach him the things that the children of aristocratic families should learn because it involved the face of the Count Zhenbei's family. No matter how unwilling concubine Ah Yu was, she could not disobey Count Zhenbei's decision. Later, in order to win over the reclusive great scholars, Shunyu put in a lot of effort and learned these things to the extreme. Although he was reborn, The things that he learned in his previous life were still deeply imprinted in his mind. Outside the window, birds were chirping. Inside the room, the young man in blue was sitting by the window and concentrating on painting. The painting paper covered the table. Shang Junlin approached with light footsteps. He did not want to disturb this scene. On the rice paper, there were a large number of scattered peach blossoms. It seemed to be without any order, but if one looked carefully, one could see the abundant spring in it. "When did your majesty come?" Shun Yu put down the pen and saw Shang Junlin standing by the table. "Why didn't you call me? Look at how serious you are painting. Yu's peach blossoms are very beautiful." The ink was not dry, so Shang Junlin could only look at it in a flat position. "I just painted a little." Shun Yu rubbed his wrist and stood up. He looked at the sky. He had been painting for almost 2 hours. Shang Junlin consciously walked over and rubbed Shun Yu's wrist. He was very good at doing this. Today, the small kitchen made some new snacks. "They taste very good. Your Majesty, do you want to try some?" Shun Yu asked Mu Shi to go to the small kitchen and get some snacks. Shang Junlin did not have a strong appetite. After Shun Yu entered the palace, he tasted a lot of new foods with Shun Yu. He knew how good Shun Yu's tongue was. Anything that could be praised by him must be delicious. Mu Shi brought over 2 glazed bowls, one big and one small. Shun Yu looked at the big bowl in front of Shang Junlin and the small bowl in front of him. He raised his eyebrows and said, "Mu Shi, it's not good to side with Her Majesty so openly, right? Young master, don't make fun of this servant. Imperial physician Ji Yu said that you should eat less food that is too cold." A small bowl was the limit. Although Shang Junlin spoiled him, when it came to Shun Yu's health, he insisted on his principles more than anyone else. Shun Yu saw that it was hopeless to change the small bowl to the big one, so he focused on eating in his bowl. Shang Junlin found it funny. "Your Majesty, why do you keep looking at me?" Shun Yu looked up and saw that Shang Junlin kept looking at him. The fruit in his bowl did not decrease much. He sighed in his heart. If he did not eat, he could give it to him. Shang Junlin slowly fed him a mouthful of fresh fruit. His eyes did not leave Shun Yu throughout the whole process. The man's eyes were burning, as if he was not eating fruit, but something delicious. The man's eyes lingered on his face and lingered on his lips for a long time. Shun Yu was restless under his gaze. The coldness in his mouth could not alleviate the heat that kept surging up. Shun Yu's bowl was empty. He felt uneasy under the increasingly hot gaze, so he got up and wanted to leave. The sudden force from his wrist dragged him back. Before he could react, the man in his arms had already kissed him. Something cold was passed into his mouth. "You, is it delicious?" Chapter 100. Extreme heat and extreme heat intertwined. The ice was not big, but it occupied the remaining space. Shun Yu had no place to put her tongue, so she could only dance with it. There was no way to retreat. The ice gradually melted in her warm mouth and slid down from her slightly open lips. Shang Junlin let go of Shun Yu and licked the water off her chin. Shun Yu leaned on the man's arm and panted slightly. "It's really delicious." The man's lips were close to Shun Yu's skin. His voice was slightly hoarse, and his words came through the gap. Shun Yu only felt that the heat on her body was getting more and more obvious. She ate ice, but she only felt heat. "Your Majesty, let go of me. It's so hot." Shun Yu steadied her breathing for a while and pushed the arm that was tightly wrapped around her waist. Shang Junlin's body temperature was too high, like a big heater. This kind of temperature was very comfortable to hug in winter, but it was very uncomfortable in summer. Especially now that it was the hottest time in Dahuan. Although there was ice in the room, in order to take care of Shun Yu's body, there was not much ice. The two hugged for a while, and it only made them feel hot from inside out. Shang Junlin saw that Shun Yu's face was red, and a layer of fine sweat appeared on his forehead. He had no choice but to loosen his grip a little. Why are you so afraid of heat? Were you like this in the past?" Shun Yu was stunned by Shang Junlin's question. She couldn't help but ask herself in her heart, was she also afraid of heat in the past? She didn't think so. In her previous life, She was only afraid of the cold. Winter was very difficult to endure, but when summer came, she was not like now. I wasn't like this in the past. Shun Yu looked at Shang Junlin. Before entering the palace, I shouldn't be so afraid of heat. Shang Junlin raised his hand and stroked Shun Yu's face. Her white cheeks were dyed light pink, and her temperature was indeed a little high. In comparison, Shang Junlin's hand was colder. It felt very comfortable to touch her burning face. Shun Yu unconsciously tilted her head and rubbed against his hand. She squinted her eyes slightly like a delicate cat. Let the people from the Imperial Institute of Medicine come and take a look. Shang Junlin held Shun Yu's face and gently bit his lips. Imperial physician Ji Yu was invited over. Before they arrived at Yuzhang Palace, the palace servant who invited them had already informed Imperial physician Ji Yu of Shun Yu's situation as instructed. The more Imperial physician Ji Yu listened, the tighter his brows became. There must be a demon behind this abnormality. It seemed that there was nothing wrong with Shun Yu's sudden fear of heat. In fact, with Shun Yu's physique, he shouldn't be so afraid of heat. Imperial physician Ji Yu carefully checked Shun Yu's pulse, but he still couldn't find anything wrong with his pulse. Looking at Imperial physician Gu's expression, Shun Yu knew that the result this time was the same as before. Other than the sudden fear of heat, there was no other discomfort in his body. Actually, there is another possibility. Imperial physician Ji Yu pondered for a moment. After a period of recuperation, Gui Jun's body gradually returned to normal. It is normal for him to be afraid of heat. In the past, Gui Jun's body was disturbed by cold air. No matter how hot the outside world was, it would be offset by the cold air. Since he couldn't find any other reason, Shang Junlin temporarily believed Imperial physician Gu's words. After a while, the sky was already dark. After instructing eunuch Meng to send Imperial physician Ji Yu away, Shang Junlin picked up Shun Yu and pressed his forehead against Shun Yu's. I hope everything is as Imperial physician Ji Yu said. Shun Yu patted the back of his neck. I'm really fine. I've never really felt the summer temperature of Dahuan's capital. Maybe it's because my body can't adapt to it that I'm more afraid of heat than ordinary people. Shang Junlin reluctantly believed this explanation and grunted. Shun Yu purposely changed the topic. Your Majesty, has the candidate for disaster relief been decided? The Imperial Court is still discussing it. Jin intends to send Fang Jun. Shang Junlin sat down with Shun Yu in his arms. To enter the cabinet, Fang Jun's current achievements are still a bit lacking. Fang Daren is fair and honest. It's good that he's going to Subei. The aristocratic families won't let go of this opportunity. Yu is right. The aristocratic families have repeatedly failed and can't sit still. If there isn't a member of the aristocratic families among the officials sent to Subei, they won't easily agree. Does Your Majesty want them to go? Yen, the matter of Subei can't be delayed. Jin doesn't want to waste too much time on this matter. If they are willing to do a good job, Jin will naturally reward them well. The ministers all knew the importance of Subei. They didn't encounter any resistance in organizing disaster relief. Although the aristocratic families and the humble families had accumulated grievances for a long time, they wouldn't ignore the big picture in this matter. Those who didn't care about the big picture had already been dealt with by Shang Junlin. Those who were able to stay until now didn't allow themselves to make major mistakes. They may have their own thoughts, but in the face of such a matter, no matter how many thoughts they had, they would be well hidden. The officials who would go to Subei to provide disaster relief were quickly determined. With Fang Jun as the leader, an official from the aristocratic families as the assistant, and a few other minor officials, the group paid their respects to the emperor at the palace gates and headed to Subei with supplies. Considering the internal problems of Subei, Zun Jiao returned to Subei first. Only his confidants knew that he came to the capital with a light carriage. In order to avoid alerting the enemy, he didn't show his face in the capital. Other than Fang Daren, the other ministers didn't know that the report about the disaster in Subei was personally delivered by Zun Jiao to Shang Junlin. Not long after Fang Daren left, the capital was hit by a rain. The high temperature was finally dispelled a little. After the rain, the weather was cool and refreshing. Shun Yu and Shang Junlin changed into casual clothes and left the palace. Shunyu planned to take a look at the operation of the shops. The carriage clattered on the bluestone paved road and passed through the alleys. In the carriage, Shunyu sat beside Shang Junlin and talked to him about the shops. Some of the shops in my hands were left to me by my mother. These shops are the same as the manor. They didn't go through Junbeihu's hands and were directly handed over to me. The rest of the shops were awarded to me when I was conferred the title of noble lord, and some were given to me by Junbeihu before I entered the palace. Although Junbeihu's mansion was declining, a starving camel was still bigger than a horse. After generations of accumulation, Junbeihu had a lot of good things in his hands. When Shunyu entered the palace after concubine Ayu's marriage, Junbeihu was worried that he would be resentful and gave him 3 times more dowry than usual. Of course, Shunyu wouldn't refuse free things. He took as much as Junbeihu gave him. I haven't seen these shops since I entered the palace. Since I came out with your majesty today, I can take your majesty to see them. Shunyu was in a hurry when he entered the palace. After the shops were given to him, he didn't have time to check them one by one. He could only hand them over to his subordinates to handle. The account books were handed to Shunyu through Mushi every month. Even if Shunyu didn't have a chance to see them, he had a certain understanding of the situation of these shops. As the emperor, Shang Junlin had a lot of assets. There were special officials in charge of these, so he didn't need to worry about them. After a while, the carriage stopped in front of a shop that sold the 4 treasures of the study. Shunyu and Shang Junlin got off the carriage and stood outside. They saw the words Wen Xian Pavilion written on the plaque. This handwriting. Shang Junlin looked at it for a moment and whispered in Shunyu's ear, "Did you write it?" When the man spoke, his hot breath hit her earlobe. Shunyu reached out and touched it. "I wrote it casually. I didn't expect them to use it as a plaque." When are you going to write some for me?" Shunyu felt his fingers being rubbed by something soft. He nodded. "Your Majesty can write anything you want. Let's go in first." Although this shop wasn't on the busiest street in the capital, there were a lot of people coming and going nearby. Shunyu could feel people looking at them from time to time. Shang Junlin chuckled and let him go. He held Shunyu's hand and walked into the shop. As soon as they entered the shop, they could feel that this shop was different from other shops. A light incense lingered in the shop. Because they sold the 4 treasures of the study, the decoration of the shop was very elegant. Brushes, ink, paper, and inkstone were arranged in different categories. When they came in, they could directly choose what they wanted. The decoration of this shop is very novel. There were shelves that were about the height of a person in the room. The shelves were separated by a partition. Brushes, ink, paper, and inkstone were placed on the partition for people to choose from. "Customer, you have good taste. This arrangement is specially ordered by the boss. If you want anything, you can go to the special area to take a look. Look over there, that's the experience area. After you choose what you want, you can experience it there. On the other side, there's also a rest area. If you're tired, you can take a rest." The waiter in a uniform green robe introduced them one by one. "Let's see it ourselves." The waiter tactfully retreated to the side. Shunyu walked around with Shang Junlin and picked a little of each item. "This paper is interesting." In front of Shang Junlin were 2 kinds of rice paper in light blue and light pink. The former was printed with a light green bamboo, and the latter was printed with a large piece of blooming peony. They were placed in exquisite wooden boxes. Shunyu took a box of light blue paper and called the waiter. "Where's your boss?" He said that a young master surnamed Yu is looking for him. The waiter had never seen Shunyu before, but he knew that Shunyu and Shang Junlin had an extraordinary aura. He had been in the shop for a long time and knew that such people were either rich or respectable. He didn't dare to neglect them. "Please wait for a moment, I'll go now." After the waiter left, Shang Junlin lowered his voice and asked, "Did you also come up with these designs?" He knew that Shunyu had a lot of strange ideas, from big ones that could shake the imperial court to small ones that could create new snacks. Now, there was this new shop that was full of novelty. It really brought him surprises all the time. "I just made some small suggestions. I didn't expect them to make the finished products so quickly. Yu's small suggestions often make things extraordinary." Shang Junlin tapped his forehead. Water control method, cement method, ice making method, which one of them wouldn't cause a huge sensation? While they were talking, the shop owner quickly walked over. The shop owner was a middle-aged man in his 30s. When he heard that a young master surnamed Yu had come to the shop, he hurried outside. Young master, do you want to talk inside? The shop owner saw that Shun Yu was acting intimately with a tall man and his footsteps were almost floating. He knew Shun Yu's identity, so the identity of the man who came with Shun Yu and acted intimately with Shun Yu was self-evident. Shun Yu turned to Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin looked back at him. If a Yu wants to go, then go. Shun Yu was about to answer when a green-clothed waiter hurriedly ran over. Shopkeeper, it's not good. Those people are here again. What happened? It's nothing. Young masters, please come with me to the inner room for a while. How can it be nothing? The green-clothed waiter's face showed disgust. Those people just see that our business is better than theirs, so they often come to harass us. They don't even know how to reflect on themselves. Shut up. The shop owner sternly reprimanded. While they were talking, the noise came from afar. Oh, there are quite a lot of customers in the shop today. Boss, have you considered the suggestion I made last time? Chapter 101. The shopkeeper's face became ugly. He didn't want to disturb the nobles. He just wanted to get rid of them as soon as possible. He coldly said, I said, it's impossible. Look at you, you don't have anyone behind you. Why don't you merge with my shop? Then you won't have to worry about anyone finding trouble with you in the future, right? The speaker's tone was sloppy, like a cat teasing a mouse. You don't have to worry about my business. You are not welcome here. Please leave. The shopkeeper's attitude was firm. After a few words, the man had already walked in front of them. Shun Yu also saw clearly what kind of person came to find trouble. He was about 20 years old. He was wearing a golden robe and a golden crown inlaid with various colored gems. The feeling he gave people could be described with one word, rich. His appearance was not bad. He was waving a golden fan. From inside to outside, the word dandy was written. The man swaggered in with a group of servants behind him. The old customers in the shop were accustomed to this scene. The new customer caused some disturbance, but it was quickly pacified. Who is this person? Shun Yu asked. He didn't remember anything related to this person. He thought that this person was not an official. He is the young master of Minister Jin's family. Since the shop opened, he comes here every few days. At first, he just wanted to buy some brushes and ink. Later, he began to ask me to merge the shop with his shop. The shopkeeper smiled bitterly. This shop was newly opened. He was also the owner of a shop. But he encountered some bad things and had to sell the shop. He happened to meet Shun Yu's people and became Shun Yu's subordinate. After the shop changed its owner behind the scenes, Shun Yu ordered to change the business model. The originally deserted shop suddenly became popular. Even if it was in a remote location, there was an endless stream of customers every day. Later, with the introduction of patterned rice paper, its reputation spread and the business became better. At this time, the young master of the Jin family insisted on buying the shop. In the blink of an eye, the young master of the Jin family had already arrived in front of the four people. He closed his fan and pressed it against his chin. Then tell me, what do you want to agree to my request? Do you want me to let you manage the shops under my name? That shop of yours has always been losing money. What's the use of giving it to us shopkeepers? The green-robed servant was indignant. Isn't this your shopkeeper's miraculous hands? If I remember correctly, this shop has been losing money before, right? Jin Gongzi was not angry even after being rebuked. His expression was still the same as before. Shun Yu observed him for a moment and found that he was really not angry. He originally thought that this person was looking for trouble, but now it seemed that this was not the case. What exactly did this young Master Jin want to do? Don't look for me again, I won't agree. If he didn't feel that Jin Gongzi had no malice, the boss wouldn't have talked to him. Why? From time to time, the eyes of the surrounding guests swept over them. Shun Yu saw that Jin Gongzi was unwilling to give up, so he said, let's talk somewhere else. Young Master Jin was reluctant. He wanted to ask, who are you? Why can you make the decision? But seeing that the boss had no objection, he silently swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth. The four of them went into the inner room. The boss glanced at Shen Yu, and Shen Yu nodded slightly at him. I can't agree to your request, no matter how generous your conditions are, because this shop doesn't belong to me. The boss explained. Ah! Jin Gongzi was dumbfounded. Haven't you always been the owner of this shop? You know about my past. He didn't know anyone with a status like the Jin family before. You haven't moved your shop, so of course I know that you used to be the owner of this shop. I also know that there were always people looking for trouble with you. You didn't sell the shop to that person, right? You might as well sell it to me. The boss had a headache because of his jumpy thoughts. What are you thinking? Now this shop is young Master Yu's. Jin Gongzi followed the boss's line of sight and looked at Shen Yu. Shen Yu nodded slightly. No wonder you are so respectful to them. It turns out that they are the new owners. Jin Gongzi muttered. Now can you tell me what's going on? Shen Yu said in a low voice. The boss also wanted to know why Jin Gongzi was so diligent. Jin Gongzi was stared at by several people, so he didn't look away. It's Zhu Dingsheng. I don't get along with him. When I saw him instructing his servants to make you unable to stay in this place, I didn't let him succeed. Since you now have a new owner, you won't be bullied by him anymore. These days, the Zhu family didn't come looking for trouble because you stopped them. No one knew who the real owner of this shop was except for him. At first, he was curious about why the Zhu family stopped. He didn't expect that someone was secretly helping him. Jin Gongzi swaggered into the shop every day with a group of servants. When the Zhu family saw it, they didn't dare to do anything. Although the Zhu family was a little rich, they couldn't be compared with the Jin family. The misunderstanding was cleared up, so Jin Gongzi left with his servants. The purchase of the shop didn't go through Shen Yu's hands, so he didn't know about it. Now that he knew, he couldn't completely ignore it. What's going on? Shen Yu's knuckles tapped on the wooden table. Before Gongzi's people found me, I was already at my wit's end. The Zhu family took a fancy to this place and wanted to take it by force. At that time, the shop's business was not good, and someone maliciously hindered it, so the old customers also ran away. After a period of renovation, the shop was closed for a period of time. When it was reopened, the Zhu family didn't come looking for it. He thought that Shen Yu's people warned the Zhu family behind their back. He was just a small boss, so he couldn't do anything to the Zhu family. But for any aristocratic family in Beijing, the Zhu family was nothing. Since you work for me, if there's anything you can't solve, just tell me directly. Shen Yu would naturally protect people who worked for him conscientiously. Shen Yu looked at the shop's account book and asked about the shop's situation and future plans. The boss of the bookstore knew what was going on, so his answers were basically satisfactory to Shen Yu. There were other shops to check, so Shen Yu didn't stay for long. How much does you know about the boss of this shop? In the carriage, Shang Junlin fed Shen Yu a peeled pine nut candy. Shen Yu was greedy and asked Shang Junlin to buy the pine nut candy when they passed by a small stall just now. Shang Junlin always agreed to Shen Yu's small requests, so he got off the carriage and bought 2 packets. The pine nut candy was very sweet. Shen Yu narrowed his eyes with satisfaction. At that time, I was in the palace, so I couldn't do many things myself. So I handed them over to my subordinates. At that time, my subordinates sent me a message saying that there was a shop that needed to be sold. All the requirements met my requirements, so I asked them to buy the shop. Later, I learned that the original boss of the shop had been doing this for generations, so I let him continue to manage it. The boss's surname is Yi, and he has lived in the capital for generations. He's kind and doesn't have any bad relationships with people. As for his relationship with the Zhu family, I'm not sure. Shen Yu couldn't know everything that happened to every one of his subordinates. This person gives me a familiar feeling. Shang Junlin frowned. Maybe it's my illusion. If your majesty is worried, then let the hidden dragon guards check it out. Check on the Zhu family too. Okay. Then, the two of them went to the jewelry shop. This shop was located in the busiest area in the capital. There was an endless stream of people coming and going. They didn't enter the shop, but went to the backyard from the side. Among all the shops, this shop had the most beautiful accounts. It even opened a branch not long ago. Shinyu didn't expect a woman's purchasing ability to be so amazing. After receiving the news, the shopkeeper put down what he was doing and welcomed the two of them in. "Young master, have some tea." This shop was left behind by Shinyu's mother. The shopkeeper was also an old man by Shinyu's side. In the past few years, the shop wasn't doing well, and the shopkeeper felt guilty. Later on, with the prescription given by Shinyu, he developed a new product and it became one of the most profitable shops in the capital. Only then did the guilt in his heart disappear. He worked harder and harder. Shinyu only gave him a few new products. The shopkeeper came up with different ways to make and sell them. Some were for the ladies of aristocratic families, and some were for ordinary ladies. The former was exquisite and expensive, while the latter was cheap and expensive. Both were very popular. Shinyu took a sip of tea and listened to the shopkeeper talk about the results. There was a trace of a smile in his eyes. "You've done well." The shopkeeper was flattered. "You flatter me. If not for the prescription given by you, I wouldn't have been able to revive the shop." Not only was the business flourishing, but they also opened a new branch. There were partners who took the initiative to come to them. "Young master, there is one more thing. Some time ago, a young master named Yang Zheng came to us and asked if we could talk about cooperation." The shopkeeper remembered something important. "I can't make a decision on this matter. Does young master want to cooperate with him? What kind of person do you think he is? Is he worth cooperating with?" Shinyu put down his cup. Yang Zheng, the person who took the initiative to give money to the Ministry of Works to build roads, had also had a meal with them. "He came to me several times. He has an extraordinary way of talking and acts appropriately. If young master wants to find someone to cooperate with, you can consider him." It seems that shopkeeper Shu thinks highly of him. Shopkeeper Shu had worked for Shinyu for so many years, but the number of times he praised someone like this was very few. "I just think that the idea he put forward is very reasonable." Shopkeeper Shu turned around and took out a book from the shelf. "I organized this according to his ideas. Young master, you can take a look first." Shinyu took it and skimmed through it. He had to admit that this plan was very perfect. Everything that needed to be considered had been taken into account. "Lin, take a look too." After Shinyu finished reading, he handed the book to Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin gently nodded after reading it. Shinyu knew that he could only take out more things in the future. If he wanted to cooperate, it would definitely be long-term. Before cooperating, he should at least have a certain understanding of the partner. "I will consider the cooperation. If he comes to you again, tell him that I will talk to him personally." Shinyu paused for a moment and added, "Before that, you should organize Yang Zheng's information and give it to me." "Yes." Shopkeeper Shu was surprised. He didn't expect that Shinyu would come in person. He silently remembered this matter. In the blink of an eye, it was time for dinner. "Are we going back to the palace or after dinner?" Shang Junlin asked in the carriage. "Let's go to the Yingxing Tower." Shinyu had a good impression of the Yingxing Tower. The carriage turned around and drove towards the Yingxing Tower. "Your Majesty, you didn't seem very happy just now." "Why?" Shang Junlin wasn't very happy in the second half of the conversation with shopkeeper Shu. "If you want to cooperate, you can just let his subordinates do it. He doesn't need to do it personally." It turned out that it was because of this matter. Shinyu laughed out loud. "What are you laughing at?" Shang Junlin pinched Shinyu's chin, his eyes deep. "Your Majesty, don't you think that today we are particularly like a husband accompanying his wife to inspect a shop?" Chapter 102. Shang Junlin's cold expression froze. "Ha ha ha," Shinyu found it funny. She grabbed Shang Junlin's wrist and said, "Your Majesty can come with me if you're worried. Or is it that your Majesty doesn't want me to see? I'll go with you." Without waiting for Shinyu to finish, Shang Junlin interrupted her and stroked the delicate skin on Shinyu's chin. "Since Yu has admitted our relationship, as her husband, I should accompany my wife." Shunyu heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that he had dealt with the person. However, before he could finish his sigh of relief, the man leaned over. Since we're husband and wife, shouldn't you fulfill the duties of a husband and wife? Her whisper disappeared from her lips. The man's breath swept over and wrapped Shunyu in it before she could react. She felt a warm touch on her lips and her chin was clamped by a strong hand. She couldn't break free. Shunyu was kissed by the man in his arms without any resistance. The man's kiss was overbearing and powerful. It rushed forward with an indomitable momentum, vowing to conquer every space. Under the man's powerful attack, Shunyu was utterly defeated. The slight sound of water could be heard in the enclosed space. Their clothes rubbed against each other and made a rustling sound. The black clothes blended into the blue clothes and became one. Unknowingly, her chin was released. Shang Junlin held Shunyu's soft waist with one hand and pressed the back of Shunyu's head with the other. He held her tightly in his arms. When doing this, Shang Junlin was as domineering as ever. Shunyu closed her eyes and focused all her senses on her lips. Her lips were sucked and her mouth was occupied. Under the storm, she could only drift along with the man's movements. The kiss was over. Shang Junlin still refused to let go of the person in his arms. His lips touched Shunyu and touched her gently as if he was comforting her. Shunyu's breathing was unstable, the corners of her eyes were dyed red, and her lips were as red as if she had applied rouge, glistening with tears. Shang Junlin's eyes darkened. He wanted to kiss her again, but he only kissed Shunyu's hand. She bit Shunyu's palm with dissatisfaction. If you continue to kiss me, I won't be able to see anyone later. Shunyu's voice was muffled. Let's go straight back to the palace. Shunyu shook his head. His attitude was firm. What a joke. If he went back like this, wouldn't he be like a lamb in a tiger's den? Wouldn't he be troubled by Shang Junlin for the rest of the night? Shang Junlin couldn't resist him, so he could only give up the idea of continuing. He kissed Shunyu's face twice before releasing him. In the following time, Shunyu tidied up his clothes. When he was almost recovered, they arrived at Enchanting Tower. At this time, other than her lips being a little red, Shunyu's face didn't have any abnormalities. The two walked into Enchanting Tower. The waiter warmly welcomed them. 2 guests, please come in. Would you like to sit in the hall or in a private room? Private room. Shang Junlin said. Okay, please follow me. Enchanting Tower was very lively. The hall was full of people. It was different from the simple and elegant decorations during the imperial examinations. The whole Enchanting Tower was brightly lit and magnificent. The difference was huge. It didn't seem like the same restaurant at all. When they went up to the 2nd floor, they could occasionally hear the sound of musical instruments from other private rooms. Enchanting Tower does other business. Shunyu stopped. Are you talking about the sound of musical instruments? They are not from our tower. Some guests will bring 1 or 2 girls to add to the fun. Shunyu faintly said, yes, and changed the topic. You seem to be very different from before. You mean during the imperial examinations? Our boss specially ordered us to open this time every 3 years for those who go to the capital to study for the imperial examinations. The rest of the time, we operate as usual. Your boss is a wonderful person. The waiter led the 2 of them to a private room. Shunyu ordered the dishes with ease. Do you have any new snacks recently? What a coincidence. We happen to have some in our tower recently. The waiter introduced them non-stop. Shunyu chose a few with pleasant names. Sure enough, the customers of this restaurant are usually high officials and nobles. After the waiter left, Shunyu sighed. The price of each dish was several times more expensive than the last time they came. If it's like before, this restaurant can't continue to operate. Do you want to drink water? Shunyu nodded. He happened to be thirsty. Shang Junlin took the teapot on the table and poured a cup of tea for the 2 of them. They didn't have to wait long. Soon, the dishes were served one by one. The last one was Shunyu's dessert. The fruit was cut into small pieces and mixed with milk evenly. There were finger-sized ice cubes inside. It was similar to what Shunyu ate in Yuzhong Palace. Shunyu stirred it with a spoon. This is. Customer, You have good taste. This is a recipe from the palace. It's best to eat it in summer. This is also the best-selling dessert in our tower. Shun Yu scooped a spoonful and put it into his mouth. He didn't know how the milk got rid of the fishy taste, leaving only the sweetness. The fruit was fresh and juicy. With the cold texture, eating a bowl of it in the hot summer was indeed a pleasure. After Shun Yu tasted it, he looked at the other bowl. There were also ice cubes in the other bowl, but the fruit was cut into smaller pieces. Instead of milk, there was a transparent liquid like water in the other bowl. The waiter followed Shun Yu's gaze and introduced, "There's fruit wine in this bowl. Don't worry, it's not intoxicating. Children can also eat it." Speaking of which, we have to thank the imperial court for selling ice at such a low price. Otherwise, ordinary people can't afford it, let alone make these desserts. The ice sold by the imperial court was divided into two categories. One was ordinary ice used to cool people down, so the price was lower. The other was edible ice, so the price was higher. However, no matter how high the price was, ordinary people could still afford it. It was not like the previous price, which was so expensive that it made people feel intimidated. Shang Junlin and Shun Yu didn't like to be served. After all the dishes were served, they sent the waiter away. Yingxing Tower's dishes were delicious. The tempting aroma greeted them. However, Shun Yu didn't pay much attention to these dishes. Instead, his eyes fell on a small bowl. It was the fruit wine ice brew that the waiter had just introduced. Shun Yu had been craving for wine for a long time. However, Shang Junlin was strict and didn't let him drink at all. Now that he finally had a chance, Shun Yu couldn't wait to put the small bowl in front of him. "I'll just have a taste." Shun Yu put the spoon into his mouth. He was slightly disappointed. There was only a very light taste of wine, which was completely different from what Shun Yu had imagined. After casually eating 2 mouthfuls, Shun Yu lost interest. He preferred the bowl with milk, which was sweeter. Shang Junlin found it funny. He took the half bowl that Shun Yu hadn't finished and ate it. "Your Majesty, what do you think?" Shun Yu supported his chin and looked at Shang Junlin. "Is the taste of wine slightly lighter? Are you wants to drink wine?" Shang Junlin and Shun Yu ate and lived together. Because Shun Yu's body couldn't drink wine, he hadn't drunk wine for a long time. Shun Yu nodded. The tip of his tongue slid over his lower lip and licked the milk stained on it. Some images flashed through his mind. Shang Junlin's eyes were dark. Before Shun Yu could react, he had pulled him into his arms and kissed him deeply. Shang Junlin's kiss had always been far from gentle. It was like a fierce beast patrolling its territory. Every move of his carried a strong force that couldn't be disobeyed. This kiss was especially heavy. It was as if he wanted to mark every part of Shun Yu's body. He didn't let go of any part of Shun Yu's body. The kiss was very deep. Shun Yu's tongue was numb. His fingers weakly grasped the clothes on Shang Junlin's shoulders. After a long time, Shang Junlin let go of Shun Yu. His lips lingered on Shun Yu's face. Shun Yu leaned on Shang Junlin's arm. It took a while for him to recover. "What's wrong, Your Majesty?" Shun Yu asked, panting. Shang Junlin stroked Shun Yu's lips with his fingers and gently pressed. He didn't answer the question. A Yu's lips are so soft. "Shun Yu." Shang Junlin didn't say anything else. He tidied up Shun Yu's clothes. "It's late. Let's go back to the palace." It was already dark outside. There was a curfew in Dahuan. After a while, they wouldn't be able to stay on the streets. Official Fang kept in touch with the imperial court every day. After Yun County, they would reach the border of Subei. The situation was getting worse. In order to ensure that they could reach Subei as soon as possible, Official Fang chose the shortest route. There was an army accompanying them on the way, so they didn't have to worry about bandits. Even so, they were still ambushed near Subei. There weren't many casualties, but a batch of disaster relief supplies was stolen. The atmosphere in the main hall was oppressive. Shang Junlin sat on the dragon throne and looked down coldly. "Ministers, what do you think about this matter?" "I think that this matter must be investigated thoroughly." The Prime Minister was the first to stand up. "I second that." With the first to stand up, The other ministers also stood up one after another. This matter will be handed over to the Prime Minister to handle. When they returned to Yuzhong Palace, Shang Junlin immediately hugged Shen Yu. Shen Yu felt that the man was in a bad mood. He patted him on the back and asked, "What's wrong, Your Majesty?" Fang Jun and the others encountered bandits. Shen Yu paused. Where did the bandits come from? How dare they steal disaster relief supplies from the imperial court? They were attacked in Yun County. I've already asked the Prime Minister to investigate. I'm afraid that this matter isn't as simple as it seems. Are official Fang and the others all right? I secretly sent some people to accompany them. If it weren't for these people, the loss wouldn't be so small. Shang Junlin's eyes were cold. These people obviously know the imperial court's arrangements very well. However, the imperial court's arrangements for disaster relief are public. Many people know about it. It's hard to determine who did it behind the scenes. Shen Yu touched Shang Junlin's neck. Your Majesty, have some water first. You, feed me. Shang Junlin rubbed Shen Yu's face. Your Majesty, let go of me first. Shang Junlin let go. Shen Yu walked to the table and poured a cup of tea. Shang Junlin didn't take it and just looked at him. Shen Yu had no choice but to raise his arm and feed the tea to the man's mouth. After drinking the tea in this position, Shang Junlin took the cup from Shen Yu's hand and put it aside. He hugged Shen Yu again and said in a daze, I don't understand. Those are disaster relief supplies. Millions of people in Subei are waiting for them to save their lives. Why did they steal them? Your Majesty, you don't need to understand what these people are thinking. Just find out who did it and deal with them directly. There's no need to waste your breath. You is right. They only need to know that they are destined to pay for what they have done. We're missing a batch of supplies. Will the supplies that official Fang and the others brought be enough? Shen Yu thought of the most important problem. They can last for a while, but they must make up for the shortage as soon as possible. The Minister of Revenue is already gathering supplies. Shang Junlin thought of something and smiled. The Minister of Revenue was the one who reacted the most when the news came back. He was so angry that he directly scolded the robbers in court. It scared the ministers. They probably didn't expect that the Minister of Revenue, who has always been gentle and polite, would have such a side. Shen Yu couldn't help but laugh when he imagined the scene. Chapter 103. Yun County. The people with the remaining supplies temporarily stayed in place to rest. Lord Fang took a pot of water and walked to the other side. The closer he got to Subei, the more he could feel the heat and drought. Yun County was close to Subei, but it was also affected by the drought. The ground cracked, the flowers and plants on the roadside drooped their heads listlessly, and even the wind blowing in his face was hot. Not far from the relief team, a group of men in tight-fitting uniforms hid in the dark. Everyone wore a black mask with strange patterns on their faces, which tightly covered the upper half of their faces. It was because of the sudden appearance of these people that they did not suffer heavy losses. Before the incident, even Fang Jun did not know that there was such a team following them. Lord Fang expected that this trip would not be smooth sailing, but he did not expect those people to be so bold. The people they sent just happened to be able to suppress them. Lord Fang did not dare to imagine what would happen to them if Her Majesty did not have a backup plan. As he walked, Lord Fang recalled what happened at that time. It happened in the middle of the night. Except for the people on night watch, everyone else was fast asleep. Lord Fang was awakened by the sound of weapons clashing. His subordinates heard the sound and rushed over to protect him. Those people's purpose was clear. They were here for the relief supplies, so they did not use fire. In the sound of fighting, they gradually lost and fell into a disadvantageous position. Seeing that another cart of supplies was stolen, Lord Fang took his subordinate's sword and desperately slashed at the thieves. He hit the target, but he was also exposed to the enemy. A cold light flashed behind him, but it was too late to dodge. Fang Jun was not afraid of death. He only hated that he could not complete Her Majesty's task and send the relief supplies safely to Subei. The sharp sword approached. At the last moment, with a clatter, The long sword was flicked away and fell to the ground with a bang. Then, there was the sound of a sharp weapon stabbing into a wound. Lord Fang wiped the blood splashed on his face. Only then did he realize that a group of people in black had filled the gap between the soldiers and fought with the enemy. In the dark night, these people in black were like ghosts, wandering the battlefield and taking away the enemy's life. The situation was reversed in an instant. "Everyone, please drink some water." Master Fang walked to the front of the group, but didn't approach them rashly. After defeating the bandits, these people stayed behind to protect them in the dark. Later on, they were attacked a few more times. With these people around, they didn't suffer any losses. Instead, it was the other party who lost many people here. Lord Fang could faintly smell the scent of blood. Without any explanation, he handed the water bottle to the leader. "Are you injured? I've brought some emergency medicine." "Wait for me, I'll get it for you." "No need." The voice of the men in black was as cold as the masks on their faces. "This is the medicine that I specifically requested from Imperial Physician Gu of the Imperial Hospital before I came here. You know Imperial Physician Gu, right? He's an Imperial physician who specializes in nurturing the noble lord's body. His medical skills are very brilliant. I thought that this trip would not be peaceful, so I asked for some emergency medicine. See, it just so happens that I can use it." Lord Fang could sense that the young man in front of him wasn't too old. Furthermore, the other party had saved his life, so he had a good impression of him. Hearing the name, the man in black swallowed his words of refusal. "I know that you're protecting us because you're following orders, but you should also protect yourselves. If you're injured, how are you going to protect us? The same goes for the people you brought with you. If you need anything, just say it." Lord Fang couldn't help but ramble. The young man chuckled. "Do the people in the Imperial Court know that Lord Fang is so meticulous? I don't need them to know what to do." Lord Fang waved his hand. "I'll go get the medicine for you." "Wait a moment." Lord Fang came back with the medicine. There were several bottles of medicine of different sizes. At a glance, one could tell that it was Imperial Physician Gu's style. Seeing the young man take the medicine and stuff it into his clothes, Lord Fang smiled with satisfaction. "You can't ignore your health. Remember to apply the medicine properly." "Thank you for the medicine, Lord Fang." The man in black clasped his hands. "No need. If anyone should thank someone, I should be the one thanking you for saving my life." Lord Fang stopped him. Then, his expression turned serious. "I'm afraid that the next part of the journey won't be easy. I'll have to trouble you." After Lord Fang finished speaking, he went back. He was the main person in charge of the disaster relief this time. There were still many things to do. After resting and reorganizing, Lord Fang took people to count the supplies. He wrote down the losses and surplus in a memorial and sent it back to the Imperial Court. Then, he took people to continue north. Their mission had just begun. After receiving the memorial from Subei, Shang Junlin immediately summoned the Prime Minister and the Minister of Revenue to discuss the next step of the plan. Subei involved a lot of people and was a solid barrier for Dahuan in the north. No matter what, nothing could happen to it. Imperial Physician Gu seems to have something on his mind. Did something happen? After taking his pulse, Shunyu saw that Imperial Physician Gu was distracted and asked. "It's this subject's younger brother. He said that he had to go out for a few days. It's been more than 10 days and there's been no news from him." Imperial Physician Gu didn't have any friends who could talk about these things. He was really worried, so Shunyu couldn't help but ask. "Gu Huai?" "Yes, Xiao Huai has never been separated from me for so long in his life. I don't know where he went or if he's in danger." Imperial Physician Gu frowned slightly. "Don't worry, Imperial Physician Gu. Gu Huai will be fine. Thank you for your comfort." At night, Shunyu nestled in Shang Junlin's arms and asked about Gu Huai. "Your Majesty, do you know where Gu Huai went?" Why are you suddenly asking about him?" Shang Junlin pinched Shunyu's face. "Who said something to you?" "Shunyu, it's Imperial Physician Gu. He was worried about his younger brother and said a few words to me." "Shang Junlin, Do you still remember that I sent people to secretly follow Fang Jun? Shen Yu, Your Majesty is saying that the person who secretly followed Lord Fang to Subei was Jiyu Huai. Shang Junlin nodded. Shen Yu, why did Your Majesty think of sending him? Shang Junlin, first, no one in the court knows about Jiyu Huai. Sending him is convenient to avoid people's eyes and ears. Second, I see that he is a talented general and want to give him an opportunity to perform meritorious service. The Dahuan Kingdom's way of becoming an official was fixed, and only the military officials had room to maneuver. But now that the Dahuan Kingdom was peaceful, and there was no war, this path had been blocked. If one wanted to become an official, they could only obediently follow the rules. I can't always personally lead the troops. Dahuan should also have a group of qualified military officials. Shang Junlin lifted a strand of Shen Yu's hair and twirled it between his fingers. After the disaster of the previous emperor, Dahuan's interior could be said to be devastated. The civil officials were still fine, but it was not an exaggeration to say that there was no successor for the military officials. When the previous emperor was on the throne, the capable military officials were all demoted or even killed for various reasons. The ones who replaced them were all idiots. If not for this, Dahuan would not have lost so many battles and lost so much of its territory. Does Your Majesty want to rehabilitate those generals? Shen Yu turned over and lay on Shang Junlin's body. Those generals are not the only ones who need to be rehabilitated. Many ministers who wholeheartedly served the country were also sacrificed. I want to wash away the stain on their bodies. While speaking, Shang Junlin stared into Shen Yu's eyes. Shen Yu couldn't help but blink. She lowered her head and rubbed Shen Yu's cheek. Your Majesty can definitely do it. Shang Junlin reached out and wrapped his arms around Shen Yu's waist. His eyes were as black as ink. If it was a Yu's wish to be a wise emperor, he was willing to be the most qualified emperor in a Yu's mind, as long as a Yu was willing to stay by his side forever. The disaster relief matters were arranged in an orderly manner. As for the bandits, Shang Junlin also handed them over to a general in the north. They were determined to catch them. However, they still encountered a problem in the disaster relief matter. A part of the supplies were stolen. Although the imperial court kept some as backup, it was not enough. Subei was too big, including the entire Subei army. The consumption was astonishing. It was unknown when the drought would end. If it dragged on for too long, the imperial court could not afford it. After the Minister of Revenue peeled off the second batch of supplies, he calculated the remaining quantity and had to come to Shang Junlin with a bitter face. At this time, Shang Junlin was discussing the alcohol with Shen Yu in Yuzhong Palace. After more than a month of trial and error, Shen Yu finally succeeded in producing the first bottle of medical alcohol. She sent the alcohol to Yuzhong Palace as soon as possible. Eunuch Meng walked in from outside. Your Majesty, the Minister of Revenue requests an audience. It's probably about the disaster relief supplies. Your Majesty, can I come with you? Shen Yu had some thoughts about this matter. Then a Yu will accompany me to the imperial study. Therefore, when the Minister of Revenue arrived at the imperial study, he saw Shen Yu and Shang Junlin. Your Majesty, Your Majesty. Although he did not understand why Your Majesty was here, the Minister of Revenue still bowed respectfully. Your Majesty, I have an important matter to report. Yes, Your Majesty. Your Majesty, with all due respect, the National Treasury is not enough to support the disaster in Subei for a long time. If there is no other way, it can only last for a month at most. However, Your Majesty also knows that after the drought, there are often locusts, plagues, and other situations. I'm afraid that in a month, there was another very serious problem. After autumn, before winter, the nomads in the north would go south and rob everything they could. If Subei was still affected by the disaster at that time, Dahuan would be in danger. Do you have a plan? Shang Junlin certainly knew the seriousness of the problem. I have thought of two ways. One is to levy more taxes, and the other is to collect more taxes. These two methods can solve the urgent problem. The Minister of Revenue said in a deep voice. Shang Junlin frowned. The taxes in Dahuan were all collected at the end of the year. If they were collected now, many people would not be able to pay. Moreover, these two methods would take a certain amount of time to complete. From the local area to the capital and then to Subei, it would take too much time. It would also consume a lot of manpower and material resources. I also know that this method is not appropriate, but there was no other way for the time being. Your Majesty, I have an idea. Instead of levying more taxes and collecting more taxes, it will be voluntary donations. For the people, they will donate as much as they can. We can't affect their normal lives for the disaster relief. For the rich aristocrats or members of the imperial clan, we can give them a certain amount of rewards based on the amount they donate. This method focuses on the rewards. The rich all have a competitive mentality. Wouldn't it be better to let them donate voluntarily rather than forcibly collecting? The Minister of Revenue was a smart person. He could immediately figure out the difference between the two methods. If they were to change to voluntary donations, there would be no complaints. It would also give the donors a sense of honor. He cupped his hands and saluted Shen Yu. Your Majesty is a great talent. Darren doesn't need to be so polite. The specific operation still needs Darren to take care of it. There are also the various vassals. Subei is in trouble. As relatives of the imperial clan, they should contribute to the country. After listening to Shen Yu's words, the Minister of Revenue couldn't help but look at him again. He cupped his hands and said, I will do my best. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.